Chapter 9:17. Silence. In a long silence, everyone stared at Huaishur with their eyes wide open. More accurately, they stared at Huaishur's arm. After bearing such a large amount of power, his arm was now covered in cracks. Fresh blood seeped out from under the cracked skin and dripped onto the ground. This was the price of controlling such a terrifying amount of power. Immediately after, as soon as they reacted, screams of shock and terror rang out. The scholars in the observation room were in a mess. They staggered backwards, as if they were about to rush out of the door. In the chaos, even the teacups on the table were swept to the ground. The clear tea flowed on the ground, but not a single person felt it was a pity. Instead, they avoided it like it was poison. Warning! Warning! He hurriedly put on a gas mask. The scholar who reacted first screamed, "Biochemical contamination warning. Level 3. Level 3. Hurry up and call the management office. Carry out a comprehensive elimination." Hey, is there a need to do this? The corners of Huaishur's eyes twitched. He sat on the pedestal and shook his head helplessly, allowing the chaotic group of scholars to put on layers of protective clothing and inject antidotes into each other. He lit a cigarette and enjoyed this farce. It wasn't until they had all injected antidotes into their chests and finally calmed down that Huaishur slowly exhaled. "Don't be afraid." He flicked the ash off his cigarette and comforted them. "There's no more poison." Cough, cough. As if realizing that his reaction had been a bit too extreme, the haggard scholar picked up his glasses from the ground and laughed dryly. "Isn't this just to be safe? Speaking of which, why didn't you say so earlier? You're all halfway through. I didn't want to interrupt, did I?" Huaishur raised his eyebrows and sighed helplessly. "Besides, it's so interesting. Why not watch when there's something fun to be had?" The expressions of the scholars suddenly became very interesting. "This bastard's aura. Russell, is that you, Russell? Didn't you just secretly open a meeting? Do you really need to take revenge like this?" "Don't worry. Thanks to a friend's gift, after the origin substance changed, the poison in my blood has basically been washed clean." Huaishur raised his arm, revealing his palm. As the origin substance began to circulate, the broken skin began to glow faintly, causing the wounds to quickly close. There were no longer any cracks or imperfections. At the tip of his finger, the faint light grew and turned into a blooming white rose. Its petals drifted in the wind, looking incomparably holy. "Look, it's not poisonous at all." Huaishur smiled innocently. The floating illusory flower passed through the layers of walls and came to the observation room, floating in front of them. But before they could breathe a sigh of relief, they heard Huaishur continue to say, "It's just all transformed into curses. Well, a curse that can even be contaminated by divinity should be no problem, right?" Before he finished speaking, countless phantoms from the abyss were reflected from the falling petals. Dazzling and beautiful colors surrounded them, causing their faces to turn green. Countless warning signs appeared in the observation room, causing their faces to turn red. They were all so scared that they almost jumped up. Their hearts stopped beating. How could this be called not poisonous? Do we have some kind of misunderstanding about poison? Just as they hugged each other and began to tremble, the illusory flower petals disappeared without a trace. Only Huaishur's cheerful voice remained. Just kidding, just kidding. Please don't take it to heart. You see, people always need a sense of humor. Only with a sense of humor can everyone get along, right?" The person in charge squeezed out a smile and nodded furiously. "Yes, yes. Ah, such a familiar iron fist warning." Ever since they had escaped the vice principal's harsh suppression, the scholars, who had gradually begun to let themselves go, once again felt the warmth of the organization. Finally, they straightened their attitude. There was no longer any slack and casualness caused by that harmless face. Instead, they realized from the bottom of their hearts that the tester before them was not some lab rat or an ignorant person who could be fooled as they wished. He was the ruler of the great city before them, the one who meant what he said, the king of Donbua who had established a great cause. He was a member of the Ivory Tower who was becoming more and more honorable. He was the first special military officer of the Astronomical Society in history to be promoted at the age of 18. After all, It's the sword of calamity. The person in charge smiled bitterly and muttered softly. Well then, let's get back to the main topic, everyone. Huaishi's voice wafted from the air. Is there a result from the test just now? The preliminary judgment is out, Your Excellency. The person in charge coughed twice and scanned the data obtained from the observation frame. Under the premise of maintaining precision and in the stage of maximum output, the entire hydraulic power stations will set reversed for a full 20 seconds under the propulsion of your Supreme. I believe that is still not the limit. Although it is a little unscientific to say so, it is really something that cannot be summed up with a numerical model. Its potential is almost limitless, and there is no upper limit. The only limit that limits the performance of this Supreme is the time and the load capacity of your body, which I believe you have already experienced. Indeed, Huaishi nodded. He was still sitting on the ground, unable to stand up. In the end, the scene that appeared to be jaw-dropping was nothing more than a magic trick. The tremendous output was not achieved by him. He was not the producer of the power, but the porter guiding the power to where he wanted it to go through the resonance of Supreme. After leaving the experimental environment, under normal use, I do not recommend that you reproduce the scale just now. According to the calculations, to maintain your stamina for continuous combat, please try to maintain it around 1/5. That way, you would be able to retain sufficient reaction time under the premise of maintaining flexibility. The person in charge quickly wrote the form in his hand and reported. The environment of actual combat is ever-changing, and it is not something that an office person like me can comment on. You certainly do not need me to nag about the way to adapt. Not only was it a threat to ascendants, but it was also a threat to scholars and alchemists. However, you must pay attention to similar countermeasures, such as the relevant laws of physics and architecture, as well as the secret method that alchemists use to alter the terrain. If there is a stalemate, the specific outcome would depend on your application experience and your opponent's mastery. And he paused for a moment before continuing solemnly, it is not without shortcomings, or perhaps there is a major flaw at the moment. Huaishi was taken aback. The essence of your Supreme is to mobilize power through resonance with the external world. However, resonance requires a medium to conduct, and once it is separated from the medium, your Supreme would fall apart on its own. And if the enemy is not in the same domain as you, such as detached from the land, air would also become an obstacle. In the end, the premise of resonance was the existence of a link. Usually, it was the land that acted as the link, but once it was detached from the land, Huaishi would not be able to borrow power. Unless Huaishi's mastery improved and broke through that limit, it would be an inherent flaw of supreme resonance. Air. Huaishi smiled bitterly and could not help but shake his head. He did know that there was someone who could use air to generate power without any loss. But the problem was that person was his senior sister. If he wanted to learn, Luo Xian would definitely teach him again and again, down to every movement and step. But he had to be able to learn it first. He was not so arrogant as to think that he was a one-in-a-million martial arts prodigy. Even the opportunity to learn Supreme was forced upon him by Luo Xian, while the use of symphonic music came from his own mastery of the cello. Once he left that category, he would immediately be beaten back to his original state. Look at you, a dog's heart and dog's face. Even the orchard training class was a freeloader. How could you learn such divine skills as the taking advantage of XX series? Let's talk about that later. Huaishi sighed. Is there anything else? Of course. The person in charge adjusted his spectacles, a cold glint flashing over them. Due to the damage to the anti-reversal structure, the first phase of the project that we have just completed is completely scrapped. Reconstruction is imminent. Please approve our budget. Silence. A long silence. Huaishi raised his hand and slapped his forehead, feeling his vision go dark. I shouldn't have acted so pretentious. The next test was the gift of the stigmata. Since there were no precedents for ruins of end at the level of Huaishi, scholars had no idea where to start and could not analyze it at all. This kind of divine transformation was the domain of alchemists. They were not as awesome as the vice headmaster who studied theology in his spare time and could extend the divine transformation from the scholar's laws. After young Master Ming's shadow burial advanced to great Master Ming, the maximum distance was greatly increased. The number of shadow clones combined with a large flock depended on the number of crows. The limit was 1829. The flock of crows was already terrifyingly mobile. After gaining the ability of shadow burial, their speed increased even more. It could only be attributed to Huai Shi being too monstrous. The real highlight of today's test, which was also the main point of today's test, was the great Master Ming's gift that had undergone a strange transformation after the divine transformation. Young birth. Tanya was right. Great Master Ming was indeed the most suitable stigmata for Huai Shi. The sole ability of the Hand of Confinement allowed Huai Shi to transform his own origin substance into steel. The casting furnace gave Huai Shi the possibility to go one step further. After transforming the origin substance into steel, it could be further processed. Young Master Ming's shadow burial and Great Master Ming's young birth both involved the use of origin substances. The former temporarily simulated the ability of level 4 origin substance transformation, transforming oneself into a shadow and performing jumping and high-speed traversing. The latter forcibly transformed the enemy's stigmata, soul, and origin substance into shadow, extracting and plundering them in reverse. As long as everyone's nature was similar, the transformation would be easier. It specialized in killing celestial genealogy's own people and fellow countrymen in hell. It could be said to be a traitor among traitors. It was the best choice for eliminating rebels, civil wars, and backstabbing. Originally, after combining the casting furnace and the Hand of Confinement, Young Birth would transform into Young Birth recasting, targeting the enemy's soul and origin substance, smelting and recasting them in the same way as casting, and finally transforming them into steel. However, after combining the blessings from Baldur and the qualitative change of divinity, there was a new change. Under the staff's transportation, a long table was quickly set up in front of Huai Shi. Then, the staff quickly placed all kinds of relics on top of it. "You're even using this for testing?" Huai Shi was dumbfounded. "How expensive is that?" "Don't worry. These are all items from the Ivory Tower's warehouse. If they're not failed experiments by alchemists, then they're junk that was half sold and half given in the garbage market. You can say that they're making good use of trash." The person in charge said, "You can begin the testing, sir." When Huai Shi heard this, he felt much more relaxed. He casually flipped through the items on the table and found a metal sphere that looked like an eye. As Huai Shi moved, it spun around in his hand like a basketball. There was no need for further explanation. Huai Shi could sense that this was a piece of junk. The technique was crude, the transformation was insufficient, and the matrix engraving was also flawed. It was completely a piece of good material that had been turned into a piece of junk. Using the eyeball of a hell creature, a large amount of abyss sediment, and various other materials, but after throwing it into the furnace, it produced this. If one were to talk about its function, it was probably a curse medium. It could inflict a state of madness on the enemy, but it would also affect the user. A failure. Then, he might as well use it as an example. In that instant, flames appear between the 5 metallized fingers. Casting begin. Chapter 9:18. As Huai Shi began to forge, the entire observation frame began to shrink rapidly, focusing on his right hand as it began to record all of the changes. Changes in quality, origin substance fluctuations, miraculous iterations and transformations, and the expansion and contraction of disasters. Even the magnificent light brought about by the changes in divinity. In the blink of an eye, the forging was completed. Huai Shi relaxed his fingers, allowing the metal eyeball to fall from his hand and roll around on the ground. Gradually, however, large amounts of viscous liquid began to flow out of the eyeball's pupil. It was hard to tell if it was snot, mud, or something else, but the viscous substance, which carried a nauseating stench of decay, began to squirm. After Huai Shi had used origin substance on the originally eye-shaped remnant, it had actually turned into a slime monster. Origin substance fluctuations have appeared. The person in charge's eyes widened as he leaned over the control panel. Unbelievable. He actually did it? Baldur's blessing caused Huaishi's forging to undergo a new transformation. When Huaishi injected his own origin substance into the remnant and began to forge it, the remnant actually began to come to life. He had truly created life. However, Huaishi took a step back in disgust. Isn't this life a little too ugly? Ugly was already an understatement. To put it bluntly, it was disgusting. Based on our speculations, this probably isn't your fault, sir. The person in charge reported through the walkie-talkie. It should have something to do with the nature of the remnant itself and its creator. After all, it's a failed product and it's a curse mediator. It wouldn't be strange for it to turn into something like that after it came to life. However, is it aware of its own condition? Let me try. Huaishi pinched his nose and squatted down, staring at the mosaic object in front of him. He asked tentatively, name? Ah. The squirming slime monster let out a series of sharp and strange sounds. It began to instinctively curse its surroundings, causing the rocks around it to rapidly soften and collapse. It even wanted to attack its creator, Huaishi. Huaishi waved his hand, pulling out 2 knives and nailing it to the ground. Fine, at least it's powerful enough. After studying its name, age, and gender and not finding an answer, Huaishi decisively extracted his own origin substance. The pitch-black slime quickly evaporated, and in the end, all that was left was a dull eyeball. A crisp sound rang out. A crack appeared. Broken. It's a one-time use item. Huaishi scratched his head and picked up the second remnant from the table. A metal boot. This one didn't look as ugly as the previous one. It should be an item made by an alchemist. It could give the user additional agility and the ability to step on air for a short time. As a result, the alchemy array of this thing was in an incomplete state. The forging began. After the flames enveloped the entire boot, they quickly dissipated. Huaishi let go, and the boot fell to the ground. A bloodshot eyeball actually grew out of it, and a large mouth appeared on the top of the boot. It began to shriek miserably. The high-pitched sound pierced everyone's eardrums. Huaishi frowned and retracted the origin substance. The shrieks immediately disappeared, but this time the boot wasn't destroyed. It was still in its original state. However, after some examination, a portion of the internal alchemy array had been broken. It was a weak point. It seems that our examination has already produced some preliminary results, the person in charge concluded. After a remnant is activated, whether it can be preserved or not is related to its quality. In the following examination, please try your best to choose something of the highest quality. Wait for me to recover. Huaishi waved his hand and sat next to the table, panting for a long time. Even though the consumption of origin substance wasn't large, Yangsheng forging consumed too much energy, especially this type of activation. He had to be careful to ensure that there were no damages during the process. After taking 2 deep breaths of the incense, the exhaustion in his soul was dispelled, and his spirit was once again roused. He chose something on the table. This time, he chose a bracelet. It looked like it had been carved out of red jade. It looked quite exquisite, but the craftsmanship was still average. As a result, after only a few decades, the miraculous solidification within had dissipated quite a bit. Originally, this bracelet should have given the user the ability to temporarily control flames, but now, it could probably only be used as a hand warmer. Huaishi held up the bracelet and took a deep breath. Forging began, but this time, the instant the flames dissipated, he actually felt a tremor come from his palm. The bracelet in his hand actually changed on its own. The fiery red color flowed, and the bracelet trembled. The originally complete bracelet broke from the middle and stretched out, quickly growing 4 small limbs. They turned into a small, fiery red lizard. It was very lifelike. It docilely coiled around Huaishi's finger, licking his fingertip. Then, it turned around and spat out a ball of flames the size of a ping-pong ball. It let out a sharp cry, looking extremely fierce. There were no signs of it losing control or anything abnormal. Activation complete. Huaishi was stunned for a moment. He tried to turn it around, but the lizard actually reached out with its small claws to resist. However, when Huaishur rubbed its belly, it obediently began to roll around. Very quickly, its body began to dim. The amount of origin substance that Huaishur had injected into it was too little, making it difficult for it to continue. However, it nimbly jumped out of Huaishur's hand and climbed onto the table. It hugged an oil lamp-like remnant from the border and took a few deep breaths. After swallowing the flame, it began to feel 100 times more energetic. What's going on? It seems like it has some sort of ability to continue. Did it choose fire because of its innate attribute? The person in charge waved his hand. Very quickly, someone brought over an origin substance crystal. The lizard decisively held on to it, not letting go. Its entire body began to glow. It opened its mouth and began to chew. After a while, a small chunk of the origin substance crystal disappeared. It seemed to be full and began to doze off. However, the effect was immediate, and it grew by a large chunk. After Huaishur completed all of the tests according to the procedure, the sleeping lizard once again transformed into a bracelet. However, this time, the bracelet's crimson color was even more vibrant. In addition, the miracle energy that had been lost from the bracelet had also been replenished. This is actually a good way to repair things. Huaishur rubbed his chin and sighed. After activation, just feed it a bit of money. It's suitable for repairing luxurious items, and the fee can be doubled. The person in charge was speechless. This is such a groundbreaking innovation. How could you only think about money? But why was it able to be activated so completely? Huaishur asked. Compared to the others, there's nothing special about it, right? Based on my personal guess, excellent quality can guarantee that the item will remain intact after activation. Complete production can make the activation process go much smoother, and the pure attribute will determine the shape of the item after activation. Its size is limited to the border remnant itself. However, compared to the other experimental products, the most significant difference is the amount of time it has existed. The person in charge was keenly aware of the difference. After all, from the time it was created until now, it has already been 70 years. It's possible that its own long history, after gathering many things and records, has caused its own origin substance to undergo some kind of unique qualitative change. If that's the case, why don't we try this? In the spectators' seats, a young girl full of interest raised her hand and held up the katana in her hand. Teacher, use this to see. The person who spoke was Haruka Kamiizumi, who had accompanied Little 19 over. Seeing such a novel scene, she couldn't help but take out her own money to try it out. This Chidori was the saber that Frost Cultivator used to cut lightning. It's definitely very powerful. Hey, Haruka, don't randomly try something so valuable. The little cabin in the forest sighed. Also, why are you calling him teacher? Hey, Mr. Huaishur is the teacher of the training hall. Even my grandfather approved of him. As a disciple of the training hall, it shouldn't be a problem for me to call him teacher, right? Haruka didn't mind the commotion and raised the weapon in her hand. Besides, I believe in Mr. Huaishur's abilities. There definitely won't be a problem. She didn't feel any pressure at all. On the contrary, Huaishur felt immense pressure. This plaything was the treasure of the training hall. If it was damaged, wouldn't they have to pay for it? But she had already said this, and Huaishur actually began to be eager to try it out. Since he was already here, he might as well try it out. If you want to try it out, then so be it. Very quickly, a well-decorated katana was delivered in front of Huaishur. The blade was like frost and snow, overflowing with an ancient aura. Within it, there was a faint burst of sword chi and a sharp killing intent. Just by looking at it, one could tell that it was a rare, good katana. After Huaishur did his best to recover, he took a deep breath and tightly gripped the hilt of the katana with full concentration. Forging began. Flames flashed and disappeared. In the blink of an eye, the katana in his hand disappeared. Immediately after, a bolt of lightning shot out of thin air, and a crisp sound resounded throughout the entire underground space. That bolt of lightning left Huaishur's hands and soared in the sky. Very quickly, it crashed into the ground. After a thunderclap, the bolt of lightning shot out. Woof woof, woof. A nimble Shiba Inu actually leaped out from the bolt of lightning. Its footsteps were light and quick, and it was running around lively in the field. On its neck, there was even a triangular scarf with the same color as the katana. After intimately rubbing against Huai Shi's trousers, it actually lay on the ground and smelled the scent. Then, it rushed into the spectator seats and threw itself into Waizumi Haruka's arms. It wagged its tail and began to crazily lick. Ha ha ha, so itchy. Good child, good boy, good boy. Waizumi held the Shiba Inu in her hands and excitedly rubbed it. I didn't expect it to be so cute. Mister is so amazing. If I had known earlier, I would have brought Lucky Light bone food as well. Hey, enough is enough. At the side, Jun Zhonghua shook his head and couldn't help but reach out to rub it. Needless to say, it felt pretty good. It actually still has the original sacred mark. This is already a hell creature. The person in charge observed the data. But why is it called Chidori and turned into a Shiba Inu? Probably because of the samurai's loyalty. Huaisha shook his head and sighed. To serve the king, even at the risk of death. From this point of view, as a samurai sword, it was indeed not wrong to turn into a loyal dog. However, soon, Huaisha looked at his other student with sinful eyes, being looked at with expectation. Yuan subconsciously hugged Shan Jun tightly. She wanted to say something, but hesitated. In the end, she hesitated and handed over her giant sword. However, a pair of eyes full of uneasiness looked to Huaisha's back, making Huaisha feel particularly guilty. It was as if he had snatched a child's most cherished toy. Don't worry, just a moment. I'll return it to you when it's done. Although he said so, there was no hesitation in his hands. The casting began. The flame flashed. Huaisha widened his eyes. Change. In his hands, Shan Jun's silhouette suddenly disappeared, but the heavy weight did not change at all. Instead, it was replaced by a yellow and black striped fat cat. Meow. Ow. The orange fat cat with black stripes meowed. After realizing that something was wrong, it tried to maintain a dignified look, but suddenly felt a chill on its back. It noticed its master's eyes lit up. Not long after, it was sent back to be ravaged. Its dignified meow turned into a meow, and it felt so good that it flipped over. After succeeding 3 times in a row, Huaisha's confidence swelled like never before. He even pulled the Lord of the Flies out of the bag. Keep up the good work. Hey, wait, big brother, try something else first. Beelzebub panicked and struggled with all its might. Wait, stop. Yammy, what are you afraid of? At most, you'll turn into a fly. Do you think I'll laugh at you? Maybe. Try it. It'll be over soon. Just as Huaisha was laughing excitedly, the flame lit up and the casting ended in an instant. In his hands, the heavy pistol quickly shrunk and turned into a round. Huaisha was stunned. He widened his eyes and leaned closer to see carefully. Unbelievable. What was this? Why did it look so similar? Dung beetle. Chapter 919. Dung beetle. Huaisha was so shocked that he lost his voice. In his hand, the beetle's head, which looked like it was made of metal, lit up like a display light. It vibrated its wings, which were covered with circuit matrices, and the holy symbol of Egypt's cross appeared. You know nothing. Beelzebub roared with a voice full of electricity. This is called a sacred beetle. Isn't this still a dung beetle? Huaisha retorted. Although it was unbelievable, as Osiris's core, it was reasonable for it to become Egypt's sacred insect, the sacred beetle that symbolized the sun. Although it was a little funny. With Beelzebub as a shield, Huaisha confidently took out dead water from his backpack. Since Beelzebub could be activated, there was no reason that dead water could not, right? After the Lord of the Flies was activated, it would be a sacred beetle. What about dead water? Recalling the sea of hatred that covered the sky and the outline of the Kuan Pung that spread its wings and soared above the clouds, Huaisha could not help but feel his blood boiling. Come out, senior. Huaisha raised dead water and shouted with anticipation. The casting began. In an instant, thick water vapor came and spread, engulfing Huaishi's figure. Dead water was activated. When the fog dissipated, Huaishi's smile gradually stiffened. She lowered her head in confusion and looked at the soft hairtail in her hand. No, it did not look like a ribbon fish if he looked closely. However, he could not tell what kind of fish it was. The only thing he could conclude was that it was just a fish. It also had a pair of small wings. Noticing Huaishi's gaze, the slender fish flapped its wings numbly. Its eyes showed that it did not care at all. A fishy smell of the sea rushed to his face. This familiar smell of salt. Although some fish were still alive, they were already salty. What's going on? Huaishi swung the salted fish in his hand in disbelief. Why did other people's weapons turn into dogs and cats? But when it came to him, it suddenly changed. It was either a dung beetle or a salted fish. Without the support of Ying Fangzhou's remnant soul, Lost Water Broken Spear had fallen to such an extent. Don't you have any other functions? Huaishi was in disbelief. As though it understood what Huaishi was saying, salted fish wriggled its body and raised its head. Its mouth opened and closed towards Huaishi as though it had something to say. When Huaishi got closer, there was a splash of water. She spat on Huaishi's face. Huaishi wiped his face in disgust and sniffed. Even the seawater he spat out was too salty. Even if it was exposed to the sun, there would still be 2 tails of salt. Why did this lazy and indifferent look of a salted fish that had already laid flat in front of the wheel of fate and given up resistance look so familiar? He couldn't help but scratch his head. Then he began to doubt from the bottom of his heart. Was there something wrong with his ability? The relevant tests and data collection continued until noon the next day. In the end, a simple and easy-to-understand preliminary result was obtained. Huaishi wasn't human. It was temporarily impossible to tell how inhuman he was, as well as whether there were any hidden dangers after becoming a human. Such a huge amount of data needed to be analyzed by Utopia's mainframe. After confirming that the original data was stored properly and adding 3 layers of password locks and Huaishi's personal verification, the person in charge picked up the box and bade farewell. Under Raymond's protection, he headed to the headquarters computing center. It was as though he was transporting some incredible treasure. Huaishi, who was watching from his side, felt extremely embarrassed. Wasn't he making a mountain out of a molehill? Wasn't this a little too serious? He didn't have the self-awareness of being the king of Dombo at all. The continuous tests and experiments made him feel exhausted. After resting for a while, he rejected the student's offer of a ride and left the power station alone. The main reason was to escape the crime scene. When he saw the row of hydraulic turbines that he had destroyed, he felt his wallet twitch. The main reason was that he had to take another loan before he could repay it. He had to work for these King bankers. His heart ached. Under the afternoon sun, he strolled lazily along the road and heard the sound of waves in the distance. He could see people jogging with headbands, panting as they brushed past him. Drivers with camping tools tied to the roof of their cars drove up the mountain with their families. There was also a long line of cars filled with construction materials that sped toward the city. For a moment, he felt as though he didn't know where to go. Ever since Tangi returned, she had been tinkering with something in the alchemy workshop in the basement. She hadn't appeared for a long time. It was almost a new year, and Feng Shu planned to clean up. If Huaishi went back, he would only add to the trouble. The Dombo Corporation was in a mess. If he went there, he would be stuffed into the office to read documents. As for Huaishi's group, with Huaishi's current reputation, if she really showed up, all she had to do was say a few polite words, and that group of extreme Taoists would probably rush out with their weapons naked and roar as if they had been injected with chicken blood. For the sake of Ingzhou's security, forget it. After thinking about it for a while, he realized that he had nowhere to go today. He felt helpless. Where do you think we should go? Huaishi opened his bag and asked Beelzebub. Beelzebub was still sad and didn't want to talk to him. Even the supporting actor was disgusted with him. How could he perform on stage? I just laughed and you turned into a dung shell. Ahem, that sacred beetle. Why are you so vengeful? Huaishi comforted him. How about we go practice the Abyss Stylist? and change our appearance. Maybe it'll be better. We can turn into a dog. No, a jackal, right? That's Anubis. Beelzebub roared, not want to talk to him anymore. To prevent himself from losing this friend, Huaishur decided to talk less and let him be alone. Ah, boss. A familiar voice came from not far away. It was a surprise cry. When Huaishur turned around, she saw two pink teddy bears tugging at the rope with all their might. One of them was an old man with a pair of sunglasses and curly hair that was similar to the teddy bears. Huaishur froze for a long time and couldn't react. Who is it? It's me, boss. It's me, Ojawara. The old man took off his sunglasses and combed his hair, revealing a familiar face. He was the old accountant from the paper group. Don't you recognize me? Yes, I'm Mr. Zhang. Zhang Zian smiled. It's not that I don't recognize you. It's just that I don't recognize you. Huaishur couldn't believe it. Why are you dressed like this? If the people at the foot of the mountain see you, they'll laugh so hard. What's wrong with these two dogs? Why are they so ugly? Well, I'm retired, so I want to be more fashionable. Ojawara smiled embarrassedly. I stay at home every day and have nothing to do, so I brought a pet for my daughter. Retired? Huaishur didn't understand and frowned instinctively. Why didn't he know? No, it has nothing to do with that. Boss, your arrangement is pretty good. I'm just not used to it. After thinking about it, I decided to retire. That's why I took my family to travel around the world and just came back. Oshia sighed. At my level, working as an accountant for Kyoto is already amazing. Times have changed so quickly, and I'm already so old. I don't even know how to use the new financial software. I can't get used to working in such a large corporation all of a sudden. Just as well, I've earned enough money. Boss, you've even given us some shares. Even if we squander away the rest of our lives, we'll have enough. Speaking of this, he was a little ashamed. Such a good opportunity was given to him, but he couldn't accept it. He really didn't know how to face Huaishur. After confirming that no one was playing tricks, Huaishur didn't think much of it. If you want to retire, then retire. You can't force it. Besides, you're old. Are you going to have a grandson soon? He asked curiously while walking with Ojawara. This is the second one, boss. Ojawara laughed. She's due this month. She's so busy at home. Instead, it's me, an idle person who's being despised for being useless. That's why I came out alone. Ha! Looks like I'm not the only one who's annoying. Huaishur laughed and reached out to take a dog leash from Ojawara. He picked up the pink poodle and looked at it carefully. Needless to say, this little sheik was quite playful. Boss, where are you going? Are you going to negotiate? Ojawara asked curiously. Although I'm old, I can still pretend to be powerful. You? Forget it. Just don't make the other party laugh. Huaishur glanced at the guy who was dressed like an Osaka Annie and shook his head. I'm so bored that I want to find something to do. In the end, it seems that no one wants to negotiate with me. Speaking of which, this place has really changed. I'm a little lost. Is this the way to the ramen shop we used to go to? No, you'll have to turn left in front. Ojawara patted his chest and looked like an old man with great ambition. Boss, since you have nothing to do, why don't you let me be a tour guide and show you around? Okay, but you have to go back and change your clothes first and put the dog down. Huaishur thought for a moment and said seriously, otherwise it'll be too awkward. Ojawara smiled bitterly and nodded. After following Ojawara home to rest for a while, the old man who had changed into sportswear excitedly carried his bag and was about to show Huaishur the brand new Dambwa. Where are we going? Ojawara said excitedly. Let's go to the peasant shop I used to go to and try our luck first. How about that? Huaishur rolled his eyes and wanted to hit him. Did I give you money to let you gamble? Then he remembered that his boss wasn't interested in gambling. Ojawara laughed awkwardly. No gambling, no gambling. The pinball shop is owned by our family. I don't have to spend money there. That's enough. Huaishur was angry. Can't you learn from other old men and go fishing? You're already so old. Can't you learn a little? Haha, boss, you're right. Ojawara didn't feel embarrassed at all. He bowed and nodded. The people next to him looked at him in surprise and couldn't help but stay away from him. Hey, straighten up. Don't make people feel that I'm extorting you. Huaishur sighed and saw the construction site not far away. His footsteps paused slightly. Subway. This city has changed a lot. Chapter 920. Yes, the first phase of the project. From here to Taifu, there are a total of 6 stations. There are still plans for the second and third phases. Oshiya said, before I retired, I was also in charge of the project budget in this area. Now the scale of our Huai paper construction has increased several times, but we still don't have enough people. It's just a temporary prosperity. When the renovation and construction of the city is completed, it can be said to be tenable if it can maintain such a scale after leaving the internal environment. Huaisher shook his head and didn't take it seriously. Boss, you don't like it? Oshiya was puzzled. Yes, I don't like it. Huaisher walked in front. Why? You see, Dambwa Hydro, Dambwa Electric, Dambwa Logistics. Huai Paper Construction, Huai Paper Commercial. Aren't they all one company? Huaisher sighed helplessly. In the final analysis, the group is growing because Dambwa is in a mess and has not yet been able to be self-sufficient. If left alone, the scale will continue to expand and continue to squeeze the living space of other enterprises. Dambwa will have no future to speak of. It could be foreseen that if this continued, no matter how good the starting point was at the beginning, under the continuous monopoly profits, it would sooner or later degenerate into a garbage enterprise that used the beast characteristics as an ATM. Moreover, I can't do everything in the world alone, right? The others have to at least give a little effort. Huaisher paused and said seriously, Oshiya, I can't rebuild Dambwa alone. Boss, you still think so far ahead. However, if you weren't here, this city wouldn't be like this. Oshiya shook his head and retorted, this place is completely different from the past. Is it? Huaisher said, it's just building a few houses. It can't be considered merit. It is. Oshiya seriously retorted, I've lived here for 50 years. I know what the hell this place was like before. Even if the Alliance can maintain order, the Dambwa of the past was not a place where children could run on the streets with a smile. He looked at the other side of the road. Under the traffic lights, children holding small yellow flags were lining up to cross the road. Shootings, robberies, car accidents, and murders were once the scenery that could be seen everywhere here. Although it wasn't beautiful, it was already engraved in everyone's bones. Oshiya sighed softly. When Hanako went to school, I rode little sheep to take her to school every day. Sometimes I had to find a few people from Takamura. If there are boys at school who harass her, then as her father, I have to have a good talk with the other party's parents. Even so, I didn't allow her to drink too much water at school because the school's toilets were filled with syringes. At that time, Dambwa was only able to live with dignity if you went to the extreme and killed people to make others afraid. Otherwise, you'll be trampled underfoot. That sounds really sad. That's right. This is our hometown. No matter how much we despise it, we can't leave because we have nowhere to go after leaving this place. But it's different now. At the very least, when I tell others that I live in Dambwa, I can hold my chest high. When people talk to me about a person called Huaisher, I can be proud. Let's not talk about this anymore. There's nothing to talk about. Huaisher laughed. I hope you could talk more about other people. Boss, your student is also very famous now. Oshiya followed behind and said, not only Miss Yuen, but Mr. Lin has also become very famous in the underworld. So, can't you talk about something better? Huaisher wanted to roll his eyes. It's so embarrassing that the student of the Prince of Paradise mingles with the underworld. He just didn't control him for a while. How did he become the leader of Lioha gang? Moreover, ever since he became the mistress of the training hall's mistress, he became more and more dependent on her. As the new generation of scum of the Lin family, he was completely taken advantage of by a little girl. Moreover, he even showed off his affection in front of the teacher. It was really unbearable. Let him go to hell for further study. Students who don't learn well are mostly pretending. They need to be sharpened by the cruel reality. It's time to find a ruler to give him a training class. Huaisher thought to himself. The two walked for a long time, and when they finally reached the ramen shop they used to go to, they found that the shop had changed its location. The boss relied on a large stack of bills from the Huai Paper Group to rent a large shop at a discount. Now, it was said that business was booming, and they were going to open a branch. How about eating eel rice? Oshia suggested. Speaking of fish, Huaisher couldn't help but think of the disappointing salted fish in his bag, and his heart ached. In the end, they found a random buckwheat noodle shop to eat. Before the meal was served, the two of them held their teacups, looked at the scenery outside the window, and chatted casually. Is Yamashita still in the Hawaii paper group recently? Yes. Oshia nodded. I heard that he's been doing well recently. What's the use of doing well? Can't he learn from Shangya? It's rare to have a chance to clean up. Huaisher frowned unhappily. Don't you think Shangya's freight company is good? He actually said in private that. Oshia hesitated for a moment and whispered, although I'm a little ashamed of Boss's good intentions, it's more important not to discredit Boss. Huaisher frowned. How is that discrediting? That guy told me that rats can't go on the streets. Oshia lowered his head and picked up a piece of ginger, chewing in his mouth. If you do extreme things for a day, you'll be extreme things for a lifetime. That guy is such a person. He's been holding a knife and fighting for his life since he was born. He's used to it, and he can't change it. Besides, he's made up his mind a long time ago, right? He's different from Shangya. Shangya is an idiot. He does whatever others tell him to do. He's too naive. That's why everyone cherishes him and never wants him to deal with troublesome work. That's why when Boss Fujimoto was still around, all the dirty work was done by the foot of the mountain. His chopsticks paused, and he sighed, Boss, you don't know, right? That guy at Yamashita, although he's full of evil, is actually a Buddhist. Huh? Huaisher was stunned him. Yamashita, a Buddhist? His family was originally from a monastery. Because he was an illegitimate child and his mother was a mixed race, he was sent to Dombwa. Before the age of 14, he followed his mother to eat vegetarian meat and pray to Buddha until his mother passed away. He went to Fujimoto's group to sign up, and the next day, he went to behead his opponent. He knew mercy and benevolence, but he still did that kind of thing. He himself said that he was hopeless. He cut his finger for the 5 bosses, and the boss gave him a tattoo. He couldn't enter the bathhouse, and the convenience store wouldn't accept him even if he wanted to work. After being a rat for a day, he couldn't see the light of day for the rest of his life. Speaking of this, Oshia couldn't help but smile bitterly and rub his face, repeating his words. After doing something big in this life, it's already a great blessing to be able to hold his head high and tell others that he's a member of Huaisher Group. How can he throw away the past at the first opportunity and shamelessly lie to himself that he can start over? That night, at the ramen stall by Dombor Road, the man with a cigarette raised his head and drank the last drop of sake, talking to himself. Evil debts must be paid with evil. Life under the sun was too dazzling and too scary because the sun would blind the eyes that were used to the darkness. Oshia sighed. I can actually understand the thoughts of the people at the foot of the mountain. The boss gave everyone a chance to choose again, but some people don't want to choose. Dombwa isn't a grateful person. There are always shameless villains. If no one cares, wouldn't it be a mess? Other than being a gangster, that guy doesn't know anything. If that's the case, he can be of some use. Perhaps he can repay this kindness? Sounds so artistic. How come I didn't know that the people in the group were so cultured? Huaisher stirred the soba noodles in the dipping sauce and couldn't help but laugh. Oshia didn't speak. Why aren't you talking? I won't beat you up, right? Huaisher raised his eyes and looked over. No, it's just, I don't know how to answer. Oshia sighed. Thinking about it carefully, life these days is actually like a beautiful dream. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night and hear the sirens outside the window, I want to escape through the window. When I can't touch the gun under my pillow, I realize that everyone can live without a gun. Sometimes I even wonder if all this is a carousel lantern before I die, an illusion. Maybe the world is changing too fast, and everyone is not used to it. You will get used to it, Oshia. Huaisher said, eventually, today is different from yesterday, and tomorrow will be different from today. This is a natural change. The difference is whether it's good or bad. Boss, Oshia wanted to say something but stopped. Don't worry, I'm not angry. Huaisher shook his head. If I was really angry, I would have been angered to death by that guy in the cabin in the woods. If this is the choice of the people at the foot of the mountain, I won't stop them. I also believe that as long as he is still alive, he will do his best for Damwa's future. Since he can calmly face the mistakes he has made, then he should do his best to repay them. This is good. His chopsticks paused for a moment, and he said softly, but don't talk about repaying evil debts and slandering others. Even if others say that I'm a hero and a righteous partner, I never think that you will slander me or be a burden to me. Huaisher looked up and told him seriously, if you die, I will be very sad. On the opposite side of the table, the old man was stunned. After a long time, he raised his hand and wiped his red eyes. Oshia held his knees with both hands and bowed in response. Yes, boss. Hey, you're too loud. You're disturbing my business. Huaisher glared at him, and the waiter serving the dishes next to him was so scared that he didn't dare to come close. Eat the noodles properly. Also, this meal is on you. I didn't bring money when I went out. Yes, boss. I told you to be quiet. Why are you crying? You're already so old. Miss, don't be afraid. My friend is acting in a play. Please bring him a pack of tissues. In short, the meal was a mess. Before the noodles were finished, the house finally returned to normal. At the foot of the mountain, someone ran out of nowhere and knelt outside the shop, crying and begging for forgiveness. Later, Shanya also ran over to add to the chaos. The whole street knew that the boss of the Huaiji group was patrolling the streets, and Huaisher was having a headache. In the end, they left in the car and didn't go shopping. The beautiful half-a-day's rest was ruined. Is there something wrong with the brains of you Ingzhou people? I asked you to stay a little longer, but you made it seem like I asked you to commit seppuku. Can't you learn something? There's something wrong with you. When Huaisher returned to the Stone Marrow restaurant, it was almost dinner time. Then, when he saw the old bastard chatting with Feng Shu in the garden behind the fence, he almost jumped in fright. It felt like an unlucky day had come to an unlucky end. What the hell? What are you doing in my house? Huaisher was shocked and lost his voice. Of course, it's a home visit, Huaisher classmate. The man who had rolled up his trousers and squatted by the flower bed, discussing his experience with Feng Shu, raised his head and took off the straw hat on his head, revealing a head of white hair. He raised his eyebrows proudly at the young man. Surprise? The teacher is here. Luo Su said, do you feel very surprised? Chapter 921. Ingzhou Danbua, 8 o'clock, Stone Marrow Restaurant. When the city lights in the distance were lit, dinner began. What good luck! Russell wrapped his napkin in anticipation, beaming with joy. Just in time for dinner. What a coincidence! Yes, what a coincidence. Huaisher sat across from him with an expressionless face. What's even more coincidental is that I actually drew this from the All Ages card store in Kyoto Station. Russell excitedly took out the gold-rimmed All Ages card and showed it to Huaisher. Look, the bond between us is really unbreakable. I actually drew this casually. It seems that the student's love for the teacher is really deep. The corners of Huaisher's eyes suddenly twitched wildly. It felt like a shameful play All Ages card, gold card. Sort of disaster, Huaisher. After the King of Danbua, in less than 3 months, the All Ages card actually launched a limited edition gold card of Huaisher during the year-end promotion. The sudden collapse of one of the top 10 legendary workshops, Helios, was undoubtedly a shocking event. It was worthy of another wave of money from the Tomorrow News. And Huaisher was once again pushed to the forefront of the storm because of this. However, this time was different from the previous role of Danbua's savior. Huaisher played the role of the destroyer of Helios and the killer of the Grandmaster, because the information related to Baldur's rebirth and fall, as well as the destruction element Apophis, was within the scope of regulations and was restricted and censored by the Astronomical Association. And for the Tomorrow News, this part of the content belonged to the category of having to pay more money, so it was not widely publicized. The people who knew the inside story were limited to a small group. The reason why Helios's fall was publicized to the public was because of the Grand Master Publius's escape from prison. In order to prevent Publius from revealing his ulterior motives, the landers who received Helios's invitation acted out a heroic and emotional scene with the enemy. At the end of the story, with the sacrifice of Grandmaster Garland as the price, Huaisher personally defeated Publius, who had assimilated with Helios, completely putting an end to his scheme. Friendship, hard work, sacrifice, and victory. Those who didn't know would think that this was some hot-blooded manga. As for the title of Disaster Sword, it wasn't a compliment at all. In fact, it was a little derogatory. On one hand, it was because Huaishir might be the only person in the world who had killed a great grandmaster in the past 100 years. This was to show off his achievements. On the other hand, Tomorrow News felt that there was something wrong with this little brother. Led by G.E., the chief editor of the news, whose ex-boyfriend had died not long ago, and with all kinds of black material provided by the henchman detective, they made a special issue about Huaishir since her debut. They also carefully listed Huaishir's experience after she became a sublimator. It was so detailed that it covered every step from Exine High to Danbo. Then there was a problem. It was like the story of Tang Seng's 81 tribulations, and no one would believe it. But when they counted with their fingers, they found that. How did this guy get into trouble wherever he went? After staying in Exine High for 17 years and just becoming a sublimator, Green Sun almost pulled out the boundary wedge of Exine High. The first mission he participated in was involved in the war between the Eastern Summer Genealogy and the Ranchers, and it even involved the old Shanghai. He went to the high seas to retrieve a Philosopher's Stone, but the Philosopher's Stone exploded. He went to Jinling to participate in a rookie competition, but he was slaughtered by his senior sister in the rookie competition, and he almost killed his senior sister in the end. Did you think that was the end? As soon as the rookie competition in Jinling ended, he happily went to participate in someone's 100th birthday celebration. In the end, he lived to be 100 years old. After killing dozens of border hunters, he even sent his direct superior to him to jail. After that, things got out of hand. First, he blew up the perpetual motion furnace and rubbed the Ivy League on the ground. Then, he blew up the luxurious tourist train constellation at the border. Following that, he killed so many people in Donbua that even the tough-as-nails general could not withstand it and was sent to the trench prison. In the end, everyone thought that he would stop for a while, but after resting for 2 months, this guy came out again and killed another grandmaster to prepare for the new year. This was F***ing beyond the ordinary level of absurdity. Are you human? Along the way, everyone found that this prince who looked like he relied on his face to make a living, the specially recruited cowherd of the astronomy club, had a bloody debt on his hands. The number of people he killed was enough to circle the entire Danbo several times. He was even nominated for the King of Killers of the Year by the Hells Organization, the Human Exhibition Bureau. Incredible. Incredible. The title of Disaster Sword really lived up to its name, and the Tomorrow's News called him a good guy. Not only was he notorious in the present realm, even his reputation in hell was about to rot. It was said that there were even several bounties on the blacklist of the Abyss Jesters. The Hell Workshop owners even took out an authoritative relic in exchange for Huaishir's dog head. This price made Huaishir envious, and he couldn't wait to throw himself into the trap. In addition, he had now enjoyed the treatment of other key figures and Stage 5 bosses in the Tomorrow's News. His daily whereabouts could already be sold for money, and there were quite a few people who bought it. The Yingzhou Looming Hall directly booked it for a year. It was said that as long as this guy dared to approach within a 5-kilometer radius of the Kokyo, the level 3 alarm would be sounded for Huaishir. This was simply inexplicable. Why was there no poison in his blood? And he was still treated as a mobile source of pollution. Oh, if there's red, there's black. This is the price of fame. Russell sighed happily, seeing the new generation surpass the old. I, as a teacher, am really honored. Wasn't that right? Now he really had a whole new level of respect for his students' ability to do work. Back then, when he was most arrogant on Helios, he only did one job before he left. Who would have thought that a student would pack the whole Helios back? This was F***ing ridiculous. Although there was still Tongi in the middle of the operation, Huaishir could get a blessing from the light god, even if he didn't do anything. It was too ridiculous. And this relationship was so close that they were wearing the same pair of pants, almost to the extent of the incarnation of the human world, right? He pinched his chin, looked at Huaishir, and began to doubt from the bottom of his heart. Could it be that this face is popular with both men and women? Is this the dark side of reinforcements? Love. The young people of the new era can't be underestimated. Huaishir felt goosebumps all over her body from the strange look in his eyes. Hey, what are you thinking about? Oh, I'm proud of my students' achievements. Eat. The old man smiled elegantly, picked up the knife and fork, and tasted the steak in front of him. His eyes suddenly lit up. Oh, this taste is really great. As a teacher, I'm actually envious of my student. If it were other people, I might not be able to help but want to take them back. You really don't want to consider going to the ivory tower to teach some newcomers? Nowadays, all the chefs want to drug me. It's really outrageous. Feng Shu just smiled reservedly. For me, being able to take care of the young master is enough. I don't care about other things. If Mr. Russell likes it, please come and be my guest often. Then it's my fault for being presumptuous. I apologize. Russell sighed regretfully. Please give me another dessert. I need more pudding to make up for this loss. Please wait a moment. Feng Shu smiled, turned around, and left after handing over the pudding. Huaishir's eyes became dangerous. This old thing came to his house, ate his food, drank his wine, and still wanted to hook up with his family. Tonight, he was going to personally make a filial supper for Teacher Russell. The kind that could be eaten with a smile in the netherworld. After dinner, Russell tilted his head and lit the cigar at the corner of his mouth. He lay on the sofa and sighed. Your house is really good. I don't want to leave. Huaishir shook his head and picked up the teacup for the fourth time. After swirling it for a long time, he realized that it meant that it was not the right time. He put down the cold tea and sighed. So, why did you come to the Discovery Realm? If a guy like Huaishir was a moving source of pollution, then Russell, the principal of the Ivory Tower and a Level 5 Ascendant, was simply a human-shaped nuclear warhead. The moment he entered the Discovery Realm, he would appear on the Astronomical Society's observation list. In particular, his identity as the principal of the Ivory Tower represented one of the leaders of the last remnants of the Utopia. His every move would cause all kinds of waves and far-reaching effects. In the past few decades, the number of times Russell came to the Discovery Realm for non-official business, especially outside of London, could be counted on one hand. Now, it had been 9 years since he last stepped into the Discovery Realm without warning. Huaishir could guess with his heels that there were probably people looking at Huaishir's house with binoculars on the mountaintop outside of Doomsday Kingdom. With Huaishir, the current master of the realm, as the student of the king of Doomsday, it was too easy for Russell to do anything he wanted. It could be said that this old man was having a good time eating steak, drinking red wine, and smoking cigars here, but who knew how many people outside were working overtime because of this? It was likely that the looming hall was now in a meeting to urgently discuss why this world-famous educator had come, how to deal with it, and whether this was a new step in the Ivory Tower strategic goal for the next stage. One of the master and disciple was full of blood debts, while the other was scheming and astute. What kind of conspiracy was brewing in the dark? Would it cause turmoil in the entire Yingzhou or Asia? No one knew what this old bastard was selling in his gourd. Even Huaishir, who was regarded as an accomplice, was confused. Since the first moment this old man stepped into the Discovery Realm, he had thrown the blame on Huaishir. How could he be happy? Don't worry, it's just a trip. Russell leaned on the sofa, changed into a more comfortable position, and said slowly, I'm here to see my student, and then to see my old friends. Don't worry, I won't stay at your house for long. I'll leave tomorrow. Are you sure? Huaishir was suspicious. Of course, why would I lie to you? Russell sighed helplessly. Can't I go on a trip? Huaishir, you have a prejudice against me. I don't think about how to persecute you every day. Why do you make me, a lonely and helpless old man, so embarrassed? Well, there was definitely something wrong with this old bastard. Huaishir was instantly alert. What did one do tonight? No one knew. Huaishir didn't sleep all night and stayed in the living room. As a result, he waited until dawn. Russell went downstairs to eat breakfast with a red Christmas nightcap, but nothing happened. After breakfast, Russell simply packed up his luggage, changed into a new suit, dragged the small suitcase to the door, and politely said goodbye to Feng Shu. Without any hesitation, Huaishir was in disbelief. Was this old bastard really just playing around this time? This was not scientific. At the same time, there was a subtle sense of guilt in his heart. After all, although Russell wasn't a human when he was acting like a bastard, he was still quite good to him. How about, I send you off? He asked tentatively. No need to send me off. Don't be so polite, Huaishir. Russell laughed heartily and waved his hand to refuse. But before Huaishir could breathe a sigh of relief, he directly threw the car keys into Huaishir's hand. After all, you have to come with me. What? Huaishir was shocked and lost his voice. Let's go, Huaishir. Russell waved his hand and whistled, his old face full of joy. Our graduation trip is about to begin. Chapter 922. Huaishir's vision blurred. By the time he reacted, he was already sitting in the car on the highway outside Doomsday. He had been on guard all day and night, but he was still arranged. Wait, Huaishir reacted and turned around in shock. Why do you want me to go with you? In the passenger seat, Russell's chair was flat. He put his legs on the dashboard and shook his legs proudly, humming a song. This is a graduation trip, Huaishir. Of course, you and I, teacher and student, are the best choices to improve our relationship, broaden our horizons, and cultivate our bonds. Huaishir didn't know if his horizons could be broadened. He only felt that the teacher-student relationship with Russell was starting to reverse at the speed of the highway. Bonds? What bonds? There were only arrangements, no bonds. But he was already in the car by Russell. Huaishir couldn't jump out of the car and run away now. This old B** star arranged things one after another. God knows what else he could do after he jumped out of the car. He gritted his teeth and glared for a long time. He couldn't help but sigh. He could only comply. Who asked him to be his direct leader and teacher? Where are we going? He stepped on the accelerator tiredly. Anywhere. The world is so big, there's always room to go around. Russell magically changed into a tourist outfit with a big flowery shirt and shorts. He didn't care that it was winter. He whistled excitedly like a child. Let's go traveling. Huaishir's whole body went numb. He almost broke the steering wheel. So, there has to be a destination, right? Let me see, the first stop, Nara. Russell took out the travel brochure and flipped through it. He nodded. There are deer. Hey, haven't you been in Nara? How was it? Were there many deer? There were quite a few, but they were all a group of unruly people who blocked the road and robbed the food. Huaishir sighed and reluctantly turned on the fork. To be honest, I want to travel with a young lady more than to act in some sweet road movie with an old man. It's too good. You can bring your sister. You're welcome to bring your family. Before Russell could finish, he seemed to have thought of something. He patted his head and said, Ms. AI is a little busy, right? Ms. Gila has been busy lately. Fu is having a headache about his internship, and Ms. Luo prefers to camp alone. Oh, even Ms. Tongi has been busy lately. It's okay. Just bring your students along. I still like that little girl Yuan. She must be as fun to bully as Isaac. Hey, don't use your bad habits on my students, Huaishir said angrily. And don't make it sound like I'm a scumbag who flirts everywhere. Scum? Russell pulled down his sunglasses and looked over with a look of disgust. You think too highly of yourself, Huaishir. At the very least, a scumbag wouldn't be a virgin. Puff. Huaishir's face was pale, and a mouthful of blood was brewing in his throat. I want to kill someone. Okay, let's go. Russell happily changed the topic, waved a small flag, and shouted excitedly from the passenger seat, Nara, Lulu. He's so old, and he's still talking about the same word. Disgusting. Huaishir rolled his eyes, stepped on the accelerator, and sighed silently. Just like that, the long journey of his graduation trip began. In the end, he didn't go to Nara. On the way, Russell picked up a flyer at the rest stop and excitedly changed his route to the bathing area. His mind was full of cheerful summer beach girls in swimsuits and romantic scenes. He ignored the premise that it was already winter. Under the cold sea wind, outside the closed bathing area, Huaishir, who had been driving for 3 hours, slowly turned back and looked at the old man beside him with a blank expression. The old man was holding a coconut that came out of nowhere and sucking on it. No one comes out to swim when the weather is cold. It's really inconvenient in this situation. Russell pulled his sunglasses and sighed regretfully. So the fried noodles that often appear in Ingzhou movies are also gone? They're closed. Who's going to cook noodles for you? Huaishir was angry and wanted to roll up his sleeves and fight. I'll cook noodles for you. Do you want to eat it? The kind that can make you smile in the underworld after eating it. Young man, what's the hurry? Russell sighed and shook his head. The teacher saw that you were lonely and specially asked you to go on a trip. How can you treat your teacher like this? Lonely my ass. I'm very busy, okay. Busy with what? Russell asked back. Busy writing a leave of absence to the school and pretending to be busy, but in fact playing games and taking care of the zoo at home every day? The old man advised bitterly. A salary thief will be punished by God. Why sure? But I didn't see the school give me much money. Of course, money is like dung. Dung, do you understand? The world is a boring septic tank. How can you let that kind of thing tarnish the reputation of the ivory tower? Luo Su threw away the empty coconut and drew a heart shape in front of his chest with his hands. He held in front of Huaishir's eyes and waved it back and forth. The school is giving you love. The most precious thing in the world comes from the teacher's love. Is that so? Then I'm so happy. Huaishir glanced coldly at the old man's cute appearance, and his heart was unmoved. He couldn't get such a thing that didn't exist. Huaishir pondered for a while, and finally found a word from Russell's dense bad taste. Arrangements. It was full of arrangements. Ice cream. Do you want some? Just as Huaishir was pondering, a cone with a small shark label was handed over. The vanilla ice cream had shark stripes on it, and it was as if he had returned to midsummer. Help me take it, too. I'll go buy 2 more Odin. Russell stood in front of a roadside stall and took out his wallet. Just treat it as a teacher's treat. No need to be polite. Why don't you treat me to something valuable? Huaishir sighed, took the ice cream, and sat on the bench outside the stall. There was no beautiful scenery of midsummer seaside, only the cold winter wind and an empty beach under the dark sky. The so-called graduation trip's first meal turned out to be ice cream and quick reheat fast food from a convenience store. No matter how he thought about it, it didn't seem right. But Russell ate with relish and stared at the cars coming and going on the road. He couldn't help but sigh. It's a suitable road for a ride. He combed his hair that was fluttering in the sea breeze and looked in the direction of the end of the road. When I was young, the most romantic scene I could think of was wearing the most handsome motorcycle jacket, carrying the girl I loved, riding a motorcycle for 60 kilometers, and taking her to see the sea. Unfortunately, it's not romantic at all now. Motorcycles are not as popular as convertible sports cars. Motorcycle jackets are not as high-end as Seville Street, and girls don't like the sea breeze and summer sun that can hurt their skin. This is what you always say. The times have changed, right? Even I boast that I have a young mentality, but it's inevitable that there will be a sad and thick barrier between me and the young people. It's not the mentality that creates the barrier. It's your bad taste. Thank you. Huaishir put the octopus ball in his mouth and replied with disdain, if you could be a little more human, you would be more popular than now. That won't do. There's no fun in life. Russell shook his head. In comparison, bad taste is more important, so I won't change this. Life is not easy, Huaishir sighed. So what are you doing? He asked helplessly. Can't you just tell me the plan? Why do you have to be so secretive? Well, you may not believe it, but I'm thinking. Russell thought for a moment and said seriously, I'm thinking about how to fulfill my duty as a teacher. You? Teacher? Duty? Huaishir was stunned for a long time and couldn't believe his ears. He wondered if this guy was telling a lame joke and if he should laugh along. Is April Fool's Day 4 months in advance? Or is this some kind of prank? Where are the cameras? I'm very serious. Huaishir. Russell emphasized solemnly. You see, as a well-known educator in the whole territory, I can't treat my students as tools like some black-hearted teachers and bosses, right? Although moderate entertainment is necessary, I still can't forget my job. I'm not afraid of you laughing at me, but I didn't even finish my own training course. This is the first time I'm teaching someone to become a recorder of the Book of Destiny. It's normal to make mistakes and accidents, so you have to be more tolerant of me. Then what did you think? Huaishur expressed his doubts from the bottom of his heart. I didn't think of anything, so I got nothing. Luo so answered frankly, without any concealment or shame. You see, I'm the engineer of souls, but your soul isn't under my control. It's crooked from the very beginning. Isn't it a little too late to start working on it now? I can't help you. You people in Dongsha often say, a teacher teaches and dissolves doubts. But the utopia is gone, and I have no way to teach you. I've lived a muddle-headed life all my life, and I don't understand much. I can't solve your doubts. He paused for a moment and said seriously, so, after thinking about it, I can only think about what karma I can bestow on you. Huaishur was dumbfounded. He couldn't understand this magical logic. Hey, karma is a profession's karma. Okay, it's more or less the same karma. For a sublimator, especially for a sublimator like you, there's no difference. Russell looked back and said meaningfully, what kind of path you want to take, what kind of results you will get, and what kind of sins you will have are actually destined from the beginning. He said, it's just that I'm not sure if you're ready to accept all of this. Once again, he was looked at like that. Huaishur paused for a moment. Under Russell's scrutiny, he finally felt the long-lost pressure and uneasiness. As a veteran persecutor, he felt a familiar sign. Huaishur suddenly understood and trembled with anger. You're going to arrange something for me again, aren't you? Unfortunately, no. Russell shrugged and drank the cheap coffee in the cup. Only this time, I didn't arrange anything for you, Huaishur. This is a graduation trip, Huaishur. The important thing is to experience society and increase your knowledge. How can you work overtime during a trip? And you should learn to not be moved by other people's expectations or orders and make your own choices. He threw the finished food into the trash can, patted Huaishur's shoulder, and stood up. But before that, let's continue our happy trip to visit relatives and friends. Hurry up. After all, time is short. The old man took one last look at the barren beach and the gloomy sky in the distance. Lonely seagulls hovered in the sky, crying in vain, calling out to their flock that had long left. At the end of the cold ocean, dark clouds rose. No one knew how much time was left before the storm called the War of the World arrived. Chapter 923. Traveling with Russell couldn't be said to be boring. Apart from the old man's constant work every few days and his own bad taste, he should be quite an excellent travel companion. He was considerate, elegant, and had a good grasp of the scenery and illusions. Even if it was just idle chatter, there would occasionally be thought-provoking words and philosophies. If one didn't know his bad nature, the first moment they saw him, they would definitely think that he was an amiable old gentleman. Unfortunately, times had changed, and the meaning of gentleman was no longer as full of praise as it used to be. Russell was the same. Just as Huaishur was driving through the tunnel, she noticed a change in her surroundings from the corner of her eye. The old man, who was lying on the back of the chair and playing with his phone, turned over, and the style instantly changed. The elegant old man had turned into a furry white bear with a pair of glasses on the bridge of his nose. One of his paws was holding a phone, and there was a huge cigar in the corner of his mouth. He lit it up, and smoke rose into the air. He looked like a polar bear that had just escaped from an animal museum. He was extremely happy and comfortable. He didn't know what was going on. Anyway, Huaishur was already used to Russell's tricks. He didn't know how many times he had seen similar animal incarnations. As far as he knew, as long as it was a biological lineage summarized in the present world, from land to sea to the sky, there was no animal that Russell couldn't transform. And not only did the appearance change, but the internal structure could also change. He could even perfectly imitate the leader of a large group. What was even more outrageous was that when different people looked at it, the image could be completely different. It couldn't help but remind people of woodmen, but one was a human transformation, and the other was a beast transformation. He really didn't know who copied who. It could only be said that he was worthy of being a top powerhouse of the celestial genealogy, a veteran of the Dusk Road. If the vice principal hadn't told him before, he would never have imagined that Russell Stigmata was actually the caretaker of the World Tree, the guardian of the spring, the legendary wisdom giant of the Vanir gods, Mimir. Now it seemed that he could see Mimir's annoying demeanor from him. No wonder Odin beheaded Mimir later in the myth. It could not be said that Odin was hot-tempered. If it were anyone else, they would have wanted to chop off his head if they had a lazy Riddler who pointed at them every day. At this moment, facing Russell's sudden demonic behavior, Fleischer calmly glanced at him. His heart did not waver at all. He only asked, "Why aren't you human again? This is called character design. You don't understand." Russell excitedly took a selfie with his camera. His bare paw was actually in the shape of AV, looking charmingly naive. The rarer something is, the more valuable it is. We have to be innovative. Moreover, there have been too many similar personas lately, making me feel very awkward. I even have to be careful with what I say, and I have to think through every sentence carefully. What if I accidentally plagiarize? It's fine if you say that I plagiarized, but if others think that I have no creativity and plagiarized to such a standard, wouldn't it be embarrassing? What the hell are you talking about? Fleischer couldn't help but want to roll his eyes. It's a long story. Anyway, you can just treat it as an old man pouring out his grievances. He paused for a moment, suddenly patted his head, and excitedly suggested, "Why don't we go back and reorganize the ivory tower and turn it into a company? I don't have to call you principal, but president. Wouldn't that be more impressive and domineering?" That's enough. Fleischer was too lazy to bother with him. He did not know what was wrong with him. Can't you do something serious when you have time? Can't you sleep if you don't do something serious? Don't disturb the driver. No, I want it. White Bear in the passenger seat put away his phone, yawned, and suddenly asked, "Speaking of which, you should know about the War of the Worlds, right?" Fleischer was stunned for a moment, unable to react. Fortunately, there were no cars on the road now. Otherwise, it would be bad if they hit someone. "Why are you suddenly talking about this?" he asked. "I have heard about it many times. It should be a battle between the present realm and hell, right? Well, there's no problem with understanding it like that, although it is a little shallow. Let me explain it to you in detail." Russell seemed to have finally remembered his duty as a teacher. He crossed his two bare paws and crossed his legs, intending to take advantage of the boring time on the road to make up for the students. Unfortunately, what he was going to make up for was not harmless advanced mathematics and English, but more dangerous and ferocious secrets. You should have seen the world model made by the Astronomy Society, right? The basic teaching material of the Ascendant. You mean the thing that looks like an iceberg in the sea? Fleischer patted his head and remembered. The model was quite exquisite, showing the relationship between the present realm and hell in a simple and straightforward manner. It was like an iceberg floating in the sea. The iceberg was the surface, and below the surface of the sea, the part of the ice that was in contact with the sea and the floating ice fragments around it was the border, and the endless dark sea was the existence of hell. Changed to a new version? Our model at that time was still an island. Forget it, it doesn't matter. Although the nature is not accurate, the relative relationship is almost like this. Russell raised his bare paw and drew on the foggy glass. In a nutshell, the present realm is where we live. The border is the defense line and dam transformed by the fallen debris, and hell is a dead wilderness. As long as the relationship between the three is correct, it doesn't matter how you interpret it. However, just like the increase of entropy that scholars say and the conservation of miracles that alchemists believe in, although this world has a lot of chaos and ambiguity, only death is fixed and inescapable, whether as humans, gods, or this world. It's just that the lifespan of the world is much longer than you can imagine. Let me think the last time the Doomsday clock was calculated. 500,000 years? That sounds a bit far, Fleischer said. When a person is just born, who can't understand death? Russell said indifferently. The dead world sinks and sinks into hell, and a new world sprouts and is born from the remains. This may be the cycle of the world. Of course, there will be all kinds of messy things in the middle. Maybe many years later, we can still meet in hell, but this has nothing to do with our topic. Then, let's get back to the topic. The so-called War of the Worlds is a small episode produced in this cycle. There are many reasons for it. It may be because of the change in the present realm, or it may be because of some law from hell. In the end, It leads to a phenomenon like the rising tide of the sea. Rising tide? Huaishur was puzzled. The depth has changed. Huaishur, according to the observation of Harper's probe, there will be such a tide every few years in the abyss. It may be big or small. When it's small, you can't observe it at all. When it's big, it will make most of the coordinates of hell start to float up. The ocean currents are coming. Huaishur, after the change of seasons, the storms and waves are coming. If left alone, the present realm will also be drowned by the tides under the push of the storm. Today is different from the past. Without the gods as a barrier, only the astronomical society and the major lineages can work together to set up a defense. And countless hells will slowly float up from the abyss. Due to the gravity emitted by the present realm, they will collide with each other and produce sparks called war, planting the seeds of death. This is the so-called War of the Worlds. Russell held his chin and stared at the water droplets sliding down from the glass. Strand by strand, everything he painted was cut into pieces. Everything was hidden in the remnants of water and fog. The war is about to begin, Huaishur. The chaotic war between hell and hell, hell and the border, hell and the present realm. It's not just a war with hell, it's a war with hell. He laughed softly with a hoarse voice. If you want to make a difference, there's no better time than now. The first thing that came to Huaishur's mind was to be on guard against the elements of destruction and the rulers. But then, he suddenly realized something and looked back to his side. This is the hidden danger that I need to worry about the most. Russell, you said you don't know martial arts. In shock, he almost couldn't control his tone. Didn't you say you won't cause any trouble this time? Don't worry, I won't cause any trouble. It's just that before that, I want to see my old friends who I haven't seen for a long time. White Bear whistled in the front passenger seat, looked at him meaningfully, and told him, by the way, let my old friend see you. Huaishur suddenly wanted to jump out of the car. Relax, don't feel pressured. Russell narrowed his eyes and patted him on the shoulder with his thick and soft paws. You're just an excuse. Look, it's just like the children in Doomsday who are good at their studies and pull them out to show their uncles and aunties during the holidays. They sing songs, dance, memorize Latin, and perform talents. Don't be shy and don't be afraid. Whether your uncles and aunties are happy or not doesn't depend on you. No one cares if your performance is good or not. But no matter what, Daddy loves you. Get lost. Huaishur glared at him. This old bastard was still taking advantage of him. He pondered for a moment and finally sorted out his thoughts. Finally, he understood. You want to take advantage of this opportunity to use me as a signboard and reconnect the remnants of the Republic? You're not a signboard yet, Huaishur. It's still too early. Russell was amused. Besides, it's just a class reunion. Why do you make it sound like a rebellion? A group of old men and women in their 70s and 80s holding a sunset glow fellowship party can't be illegal, right? Huaishur didn't say anything. He drove in silence. He only opened the window, lit a cigarette, and took 2 deep puffs. He wanted to jump out of the car, but it was too late. This was the saddest thing in the world. From the beginning, he shouldn't have believed that this old bastard Russell would have any good medicine in his calabash. This old thing actually wanted to take advantage of the War of the Worlds to rebuild the celestial genealogy. In the silence, no one spoke. Only the gentle melody from the radio floated in the cold air. Accompanied by the old man's vague humming, the jazz melody flew out of the window and dissipated in the wind with the smoke. Only the snowflakes fluttered from the sky and slowly fell. The outline of a city appeared in the distance. Their first stop, Nara, had arrived. Chapter 924. Winter in Nara was not the peak tourist season. With the arrival of the heavy snow, there were fewer and fewer people on the streets. Only cars passed by silently, and the sound of snow breaking was covered by the sound of loudspeakers. While resting at the gas station, Huaishur bought 2 bottles of water from the convenience store. Russell, on the other hand, was not afraid of the heavy snow. He sat on a chair at the intersection and smoked a cigar. He still looked like a polar bear, and it was very harmonious. However, he did not know what it was to others, but did not cause any commotion at all. Here, the tea you wanted. Huaishur handed over the tea and unfolded the tourist map that was given to him for free. He identified the signs and directions on the map. Where are you going to meet your old friend? I don't know. After all, we haven't contacted each other for so many years. I only know that she is in Nara, and I don't know anything else. Russell shook his head. Hey, what should I do? I can't go to the municipal government and ask them to broadcast a missing person notice through the city's loudspeakers, right? Huaishur was amused by the scene. Little friend from the ivory tower, your friend Russell is waiting for you at the municipal government. He also brought the guillotine king of Jinling with him. He wants to perform for you. Something like this? Hey, you should be more respectful to your elders, Huaishur. She is old enough to be your grandmother. Russell casually threw the cigar into the grass and patted the white fur on his body. You don't have to look for her. I know where she is. The place with the most animals. Just follow me. As he spoke, the white bear stood up and swaggered forward along the road. He walked straight into Nara Park. Huaishur rubbed her eyes in disbelief. She wasn't surprised by Russell's ability to find people, but a polar bear running in a Nara Park in broad daylight, where a herd of deer were kept. This scene was too fantastical, and she didn't know what to say. Perhaps it was because of the sudden heavy snow. The tourists in Nara Park ran to the coffee shop to keep warm. For a moment, the park was empty. Huaishur followed behind Russell, wandering aimlessly. He became more and more curious. By the way, who were you looking for? Let me think. She was pretty much the prettiest girl in the class back then. Russell pinched his chin and laughed. During the 4 phases of training, Yangzi was the most dazzling girl in the basic course. Many people would steal glances at her during class. Back then, she would often tie her hair in a ponytail, and a small mole would be exposed at the back of her neck. Hey, can you stop talking about your campus romance? Huaishur couldn't stand it anymore. This is a person's appreciation of beauty, okay? Besides, I had a girlfriend at that time. Russell turned around and glanced at Huaishur contemptuously. 2. Huaishur held back a mouthful of blood, not knowing how to respond. However, he suddenly remembered that this polar bear's neck seemed to be the type that had never been chopped before. His hands were itching. You guys haven't contacted each other at all these years? Huaishur asked. Utopia is so big. I can't possibly have everyone's phone number, right? Besides, at that time, my mind was full of how to become the scribe of the Book of Destiny, so I didn't care much about the others. Later on, I didn't have the time to care about them. Russell sighed. When Heavenly State fell, she happened to be in charge of a research project in the modern realm and wasn't injured. However, her teacher and parents had passed away. It was said that she later recuperated in the psychological measurement room of the Survival Institute for a period of time. I really don't know how she's doing after so many years. He paused for a moment, turned around, and solemnly instructed, when you see her later, remember to be more respectful. She has a bad temper. She used to be the best bionics and mechanical biology scholar in Utopia, and she was also the one who liked to fight the most among the scholars. If she gets serious, you might not be able to beat her. That exaggerated? Huaishur was dumbfounded. Russell didn't say anything. After walking forward for a while, he suddenly stopped. He looked into the distance. In the fluttering snowflakes, the figure with her back facing them was squatting on the ground, examining an injured doe and changing the splint for its bones. Unexpectedly, she didn't look old. Instead, she was unexpectedly young. She looked like she was only in her 20s and was full of wisdom. She gently stroked the doe's neck, causing the restless doe to lie on the ground and let her do whatever she wanted. Wait for me here, Russell ordered in a low voice. He left Huaishur where he was and walked forward alone. He wasn't in a hurry to disturb her. Instead, he stared at the figure for a long time, quietly waiting for her to finish her work. He was full of patience. When her work came to an end, she turned around and looked at the guest behind her. As if she hadn't expected Russell's arrival, she was stunned for a moment. She raised her eyebrows and looked distant. What's the matter, sir? Long time no see, Yangzi. Russell sighed softly. How have you been? I'm sorry, sir. After a short silence, the woman in front of Russell slowly shook her head. You might have mistaken me for someone else. It's been so many years, but you're still exactly the same as before. How can I mistake you for someone else? But we're all so old. We can't still hold grudges over the past, right? Russell sighed. I'm here this time to discuss something important with you. I don't know what you're talking about. She coldly picked up the medicine box. If you want to find someone, you can go to the broadcasting room. I still have work to do, so I won't accompany you. Russell was stunned. He didn't expect that after so many years, she would be so cold when they met again. He subconsciously stopped her. Wait a minute, Yangzi, aren't you going to give me a chance to say a word? The woman glanced at him coldly, changed direction, and turned to leave. She was stopped by Russell again. However, it seemed that there was no room for discussion. What a bad start. In the distance, Huaisher couldn't help but sigh. It seemed that the people of the ideal country might not want to see Russell appear. After all, after their dreams were shattered, how many people would have the courage to start again? But what did this have to do with little Peppa Lou of Huaihai? Since he had nothing to do, he simply bought 2 packets of biscuits from the stall selling deer immortal shells and fed them to the deer gathered around him. Wouldn't it be perfect to feed the deer and watch the show? Actually, feeding the deer was quite fun. And eat 2 more packets. He turned around and took out his wallet, rubbing the deer happily. He wished that this good show could continue. It would be best if he could book a sequel. However, behind the stall, the smoking old lady finally couldn't stand it anymore. She shook her head and rolled her eyes in disdain. Are you 2 together? She asked. More or less. Huaisher shrugged and said gloatingly, that old man is crazy. Ignore him. Heh, I can tell. The old lady put out her cigarette and stepped on it. Back then, he wasn't a good person. When he saw a beautiful girl, he couldn't walk away. He looked like he was flirting with her everywhere. He's quite compatible with you, as expected of a master and disciple. What? Huaisher was stunned. He seemed to have sensed that something was wrong. Then, he heard a deafening roar. It was like a lion roaring in his ears. Russell, you bastard, are you here to anger me to death? The former scholar of the Republic and the current elderly volunteer of Nara Park, the 96-year-old old lady, Yoko Kusanagi, took a deep breath and scolded with disdain. You're already so old, yet you're still holding on to the little girl and refusing to let go. How much more embarrassing are you going to be before you stop? In the silence, Huaisher's smile froze on the spot. He was dumbfounded. Oh my God. Oh, so it's your granddaughter. No wonder they look so similar. 10 minutes later, beside the stall, Russell held a convenience store coffee and nodded. As expected of me, discerning eyes. In the blink of an eye, even your granddaughter is so old. Yangzi, you're really amazing. Hee, you just want to sexually harass her, right? Yoko Kusanagi lit her cigarette again and looked at the old dog in front of her from the corner of her eyes. I haven't seen you for so many years. What kind of show are you filming? Are you here to scare people? Where are the cameras? An accident. It's just an accident. Russell spread his hands. Look, Yangzi, I was able to find this place. Isn't it because of the deep bond between you and me that you Yingzhou people talk about? We're all partners. Why are you so harsh? Yangzi sneered. Call me Ms. Kusanagi. We're not that close. Huaisher nodded gloatingly from his side. If you have something to say it quickly, Yangzi urged impatiently. Right here. Russell looked at the snowflakes that were gradually falling around him. We haven't seen each other for so many years. Can we at least have a meal together? I just want to know if you're doing well. That's all. Old lady Yangzi narrowed her eyes and stared at him. That's all. Luo Su nodded, not feeling guilty at all as he replied frankly. After a long silence, the old lady finished smoking and couldn't help but sigh and shake her head. Forget it. Come with me. After putting away her stall, the old lady pushed the tricycle and turned around to leave with them. 40 minutes later, in the warm room, the air conditioner blew out a warm breeze. Yangzi came out of the kitchen, put the soup pot on the gas stove, and covered it with a lid. Wait a moment. We'll be able to eat in about 10 minutes. She took off her insulating gloves and rubbed her aching waist. She shook her head and sighed. Although it doesn't taste good, at least it's better than nothing. I hope the 2 of you won't say anything to spoil the mood. As she spoke, She glanced coldly at the two guests. Huaishur held a half-eaten orange in his hand and felt that he had been implicated. This is all Russell's fault. I'm a cold and heartless machine. How could I have any bad intentions? Russell, on the other hand, was restlessly walking around the room, looking at the furnishings everywhere curiously. Do you live alone? Where's your granddaughter? It's too annoying when there are too many people. I like quiet. Since my husband died, I've been living alone. Jinshin lives with her parents and occasionally comes back to visit on weekends. You clean up so well. Yangzi, you're so virtuous and capable. Before Russell could finish his praise, the old lady interrupted him expressionlessly. Hourly workers come every week. Since you're going to cook, why don't you let my students try their skills? Why sure. Hurry up and show your senior. No need. The old lady was still cold. I'm not used to other food. Why sure snickered. It was the first time he saw Russell being defeated. He was secretly pleased. Chapter 925. Don't be so cold. Russell shook his head helplessly. Can't we be like in the past? Decades ago, you held the Book of Destiny in your hand, but you stood by and watched as the last institution of the Utopia was canceled from the catalog. You did nothing and didn't even say a word. Now, you come back with your old face and tell me, Yangzi, we're all companions and we have ties. Who's the cold one, Russell? The old man retorted. Letting you walk into my house and sit across my table is already my last courtesy. Do you want more from me? In the silence, Russell did not speak. Huaishur paused and glanced at Russell. However, Russell did not look at him and continued staring at his old friend. Back then, it's always different now. Yangzi, the existence of a utopia has never depended on the Book of Destiny. No matter how loud my voice is, it won't work. He said, you should know that after the fall of heaven, the collapse of the utopia was destined. After so many years, what are you saying now? Yangzi shook his head. It's like an old lover who wants to get back together, finding his ex-wife and saying that we can start over. You really live in the world of morning dramas, Russell. It's not too late, Yangzi. At least we're all still alive. Russell shook his head. As long as we still exist, there's still a chance for the utopia to be rebuilt. Before that, no, it's already too late, Russell. Yangzi interrupted him expressionlessly and told him, you're already too late. She said, a few years ago, I'd already passed away. In the silence, Huaishur's movements stiffened. His eyes widened in a daze. In front of him, the old woman raised her hand and took off her face. Following the gaps in her wrinkles, she revealed the countless gears and tiny structures hidden under her face. When her pupils contracted and dilated, the camera hidden in her eyeballs slowly adjusted its focus. First, it was her face, then her chin, cheekbones, and forehead. Finally, the brain was empty, and only a device like a clockwork engine was slowly turning. I'm already dead, Russell. A hoarse voice came from under the steel. Don't tell me you still don't understand? Huaishur was in disbelief. She couldn't believe her eyes. Now, he finally understood why Russell had said that she was the best biologist and mechanic in the entire utopia. She had actually replicated him perfectly, including the origin substance waves and the aura of his soul. Even all the memories of the past, even after death, the human-shaped tombstone remained. He mocked the visitors who would come after so many years. After a long silence, Russell lowered his eyes and asked in a hoarse voice, when did this happen? Last year in October. Yangzi sighed. She woke up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet. She fell and had a cerebral hemorrhage. I think it's time, right? When people get old, these kinds of messy things will happen. She rearranged her face. She lifted the lid of the soup pot and said to the two guests, eat. It's already cooked. Huaishur ate 2 mouthfuls. He was no longer in the mood to distinguish whether what was in his mouth was delicious or something else. Russell put down his chopsticks and asked, before she left, she was probably very sad, the old woman replied calmly. She had just quarreled because her granddaughter wanted to study liberal arts. Before she left, she was still thinking about getting her child back on the right path. The apartment management fee was too high. She should have saved the money that she couldn't use up. Also, the ingredients in the fridge. No, I'm not talking about that. Russell was in disbelief. She, she never mentioned us when she was alive? No, the old woman replied firmly. The old man replied flatly. How many years ago was that? Russell, don't think too highly of yourself, okay? Or do you think you're more important than your son and granddaughter? Don't talk nonsense. In the years when she died, she talked about a long more than you did. Russell was even more confused. Who's Along? The old woman glanced at him coldly. A dog. Therefore, Russell was speechless. She's already dead. Why do you still care about that? There's nothing you can't get over. Yangzi said, you have to learn to let go. However, Russell did not give up. He still stared at her, as if he could see something from the past under that mechanical face. Is it Yangzi or someone else who said this? Just think of it as Yangzi. The old woman was still calm. She was operating like a machine. She told him coldly, it makes no difference to you now. After a long time, Russell withdrew his gaze in disappointment. When he picked up his chopsticks again, he paused and asked softly, how was her life in the last few years? Very satisfied, but also very lonely. Yangzi replied, she had both a son and a daughter, and her family was prosperous. Such a life is a blessing for anyone. As for some shortcomings, there's no need to care about them. The only regret is that I couldn't attend my granddaughter's wedding. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been created. Maybe in another 2 years, I can stop working. She raised her hand and added rice for the 2 guests again. After that, no one said anything. After dinner, the old woman cleaned up the dishes and told them, the bedroom on the first floor has been cleaned up. The bathroom is on the right. Please feel free to use it. She paused for a moment, bowed, and said, please have a good rest tonight. The old woman turned and left. Huaishir and Luo Su looked at each other and didn't say anything. They also had nothing to say. In the middle of the night, when Huaishir opened his eyes from the sofa, he saw that the bedroom light was still on. However, he didn't know if Russell had fallen asleep. But what about upstairs? In the dim light, he stared at the ceiling, as if he was a lecher who wanted to see a beauty through the wall. But there was no sound upstairs. It was quiet and deserted, just like every tomb. It was just arrogant silence, letting time go by. She had passed away. No matter how beautiful the words were or how strong the determination was, it couldn't change the result. Look, you are high-spirited, you are full of determination, you are full of confidence, you have stepped onto your own path, but you have come too late. Everything is too late. Because people will die. I can't wait for your good news. Damn it, Huaishir sighed silently and closed his eyes. The next morning, after breakfast, Yoko Kusanagi sent them to the door. Well, I wish you a safe journey. She said goodbye calmly and finally looked at Huaishir. Good luck to you too, young man. Only at this time, she had the agility that machines didn't have. She smiled kindly. Perhaps this was the blessing left by Ms. Yanko before she passed away. Huaishir was stunned for a moment and nodded solemnly. Russell reached out and took his luggage from her hand. Finally, he asked, don't you go to the park today? Do you want to go together? You don't have to go today. Yanko replied with a smile. Jinshin is a careless child. As long as I appear once in a while, she won't suspect anything. Why get married and have children in the future? She won't be too sad when I pass away, right? Russell, have a safe journey too. You're already so old. It's time to learn to give more room for young people. Then, Russell nodded as if he wanted to say something, but he was stuck. In the end, he smiled and hugged his old friend in front of him. Take care. Take care. Yanko stood at the door, smiled, and watched them leave. After a long time, until they disappeared from her sight, she calmly turned around and went home, closing the door. She walked through the quiet living room, watered the potted plants, took out the clothes from the dryer in the morning, and calmly ironed and hung them up. Finally, after a day's work, she returned to the sofa. Just like that, she sat silently. She didn't do anything else. Only the occasional sound of horns on the road outside the window could be heard. The sun slowly rose in the sky and streaked across the sky. The sunlight illuminated the dancing dust, rising and falling in front of her eyes. The lonely silence engulfed everything. For a long, long time, it seemed to have lasted for thousands of years. She blinked her eyes. After a long time, she blinked again. After confirming that there was nothing unusual, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. She collapsed on the sofa weakly and reached out to scratch her itchy scalp. When she finally scratched enough, she took out a bottle of beer from the fridge, raised her head, and gulped it down. Finally, she heaved a sigh of relief. Phew, I almost couldn't fool him. Fortunately, I'm quick-witted, she complained helplessly. I knew that Russell was unlucky enough to come here with nothing good. Why did he always come to me for trouble? Fortunately, she finally coaxed him away. She was finally free. After driving away the troublemaker, she had to celebrate. She hummed a song, changed a new bottle of beer, turned on the television, and began to watch a variety show on the sofa, laughing with the host, until the door was suddenly pushed open. An old man, who was supposed to have left, came back in a hurry. She stiffened on the sofa. Sorry, I forgot to take the razor. You see, it's easy to forget things now. Russell walked out of the bathroom and noticed the scene. He was stunned for a moment and then exclaimed, You can simulate this perfectly? This is probably artificial intelligence, right? It's really amazing. Yes. Yangzi nodded with difficulty. Even her movements were exactly the same as yesterday, smooth but stiff. Perfectly copying the life of the producer is one of my functions. Then I'm sorry to disturb you. Russell waved goodbye and considerately closed the door for her. After a long, long time, Yangzi was still in a daze. She couldn't believe it. Did I fool him again? That was close. She drank the beer in her mouth stiffly, feeling that her frightened heart was still beating nonstop. However, she had a feeling that the guy hadn't left yet. Maybe he was waiting outside the door for her to make a mistake. No, Russell made her suspicious. She raised her head and drank the beer. She planned to go to her granddaughter's place to lie low for a while and come back later. But when she opened the door with the package, her smile stiffened. Outside the door, the visitors who had been waiting for a long time all smiled brightly. Hello, this is the Ivory Towers Elderly Escort Group. The service staff from Dombor revealed standard smiles. They were warm and considerate. A Mr. Russell has ordered a year's worth of top-notch care services for you, including cleaning, tidying up, 3 meals, and daily care. May I ask if it's convenient for you now? Can we begin? Silence. In a long silence, the old lady tilted her head and lit the cigarette at the corner of her mouth with trembling hands. She took a deep breath. The corners of her eyes glistened with tears. Russell, damn you. Chapter 926. After leaving Nara, Russell was very calm all the way, just staring out of the window. Huaisher knew that he wasn't feeling well, so she didn't say anything. Even if he occasionally had some excessive requests like eating eel rice in the wilderness, she would pinch her nose and help him settle it. But he could feel that under this man's calm exterior, there was a wave of sadness surging like a tide. Don't be sad. Huaisher comforted him. There are always regrets. It's nothing. I'm not sad. Russell looked up and smiled. Look at me. I'm so happy. Huaisher shook her head and sighed, no longer speaking. He didn't expect the death of his old friend to be such a big blow to him. Perhaps even someone as infuriating as Russell would have a soft spot in his heart. He stepped on the accelerator and kept moving forward. Winter is here. Russell stared at the snow outside the window and murmured, It would be great if I could ski. In the driver's seat, Huaisher paused and didn't say anything. He turned right and went to the ski resort. Forget it. I'll just relax with him. For hours later, Russell got off the sled with satisfaction, as if he was reminiscing about the past and felt a little comforted. However, when he looked down, he still couldn't help sighing. It's so cold. It would be great if there were stones to eat. An hour later, through Huaisher's identity as Hell Cooking Demon, the door of the top-quality stone cuisine in the border restaurant of Ingzhou opened for the distinguished Mr. Russell. There's such good wine. Russell stood in front of the counter and paused, as if he was immersed in memories. Back then, Huaisher gritted his teeth and took out his credit card. After eating and drinking, Russell finally smiled and said to Huaishir gratefully, "Thank you for your hard work." "It's okay. It's no trouble." Huaishir clutched his wallet and squeezed out a smile. "It's nothing. Don't worry about it." "Then, how about we go to the hot spring together after eating?" Russell suggested happily. "It seems a bit far. Will it trouble you?" The tatami under Huaishir's feet shattered silently. "I am fine." He lowered his head and was silent for a long time. Finally, he slowly raised his head again and smiled. "What kind of hot spring do you want to soak in?" "Shurjin's hot spring seems pretty good. Hakone is also very good. It's really hard to choose. But when you mention hot springs, I'm reminded of the hot springs in the hot sea that Yanko mentioned when we were dating." Russell gazed at the night sky with an expression of yearning. "Wouldn't it be great if I could go there and take a look?" 3 hours later, Russell, who had enjoyed a full set of back-scrubbing services from his students, hummed a song as he soaked in the hot spring. She raised her wine cup and looked up at the bright moon in the sky. He sighed with emotion. "If there was a blonde beauty to soothe my heart, wouldn't that be bliss?" After saying that, he glanced at the person beside him without leaving a trace. Huaishir, who was next to him, smoked and turned a deaf ear. He only raised his hand and flicked the ashes of his cigarette into Russell's pool. Russell coughed twice and said again, "If there was a beauty to soothe my heart. Speaking of which, there's something strange." Huaishir smoked and looked down at his phone. Suddenly, he said, "I just found out that during the day, someone suddenly booked the best escort service for a whole year at Damba's medical department. They even put my bill on it. I wonder if you have any leads?" Russell didn't seem to hear him. He just stared at the moonlight and sighed. Life is short, just like the falling cherry blossoms. Glory and splendor, 9 times a day and a cup of wine. It's just that I don't know when I'll be able to meet my old friend, and I don't know who will be able to ease my sorrow. Boom! The alchemy bomb exploded in the hot spring. Hot steam spewed out of the broken pipe and blocked Russell's face, stabbing the latter half of his words back into his throat. The steam rose and fell like a rainstorm. Russell was still in the posture of raising his glass to invite the moon. His messy white hair was stuck to his face, and he looked very embarrassed. But when he lowered his head, he couldn't hide his sadness. He raised his hand and wiped away the tears at the corner of his mouth. "The passing of an old friend made me lose my composure for a moment. I'm sorry. Huaishir, I made you laugh. Have you F***'s King had enough?" Huaishir was furious. He pulled out his gun and pulled the trigger repeatedly at his old face. In the end, even the Lord of the Flies couldn't penetrate the old bastard's face. He thought that he was sad and wanted to comfort him. In the end, if it weren't for the message from the foot of the mountain, he might have fooled around with this old bastard until next week. "Are you human, Russell?" Huaishir widened his eyes and roared. "I was so worried about you." I'm flattered." Russell seemed to be moved and smiled. He took the bullet from his face. Seeing a student care about himself, no matter who it is, they would want to immerse themselves in it. You still have the face to say that I'm immersed in it. Huaishir was so angry that he laughed. "I'll arrange a private room for you on the riverside. I'll also give you a cement bucket. I guarantee that you'll be immersed in it until the end." He didn't care about the money. Well, he did care about it. After all, he was used to being stingy. But even if he took the best sake in Ingzhou every day, it would be impossible for him to spend a drop in the ocean of Damba's income. But the problem was that for a moment, well, for a long time, Huaishir actually believed that this old bastard would be sad. He even really believed that old Madame Yangzi was dead. In the end, this wave was really a show of acting skills by an experienced veteran actor, making him a young idol stunned. Huaishir felt as if his heart had been smashed into pieces. These old bastards are too dramatic. I want to go back to Damba. Why do you old bastards have so many tricks up your sleeves? He asked angrily. Can't you be more serious? Be more upright and speak properly? Russell shrugged helplessly, thought for a moment, and answered seriously, because the upright people are all dead, Huaishir. Huaishir froze in place when she heard those low words. In the sudden silence, the old man raised his hand, pushed the water droplets on his face and his disheveled white hair to the back of his head, looked up and laughed. Isn't that the case? The upright knights like Orton and Gerard, the inflexible old fogies like Ing Fangzhou, the determined fearless ones like Mu Yan. Those glorious, beautiful, and praiseworthy people have all passed away with the utopia. People like Woodman and Mathers, who had lost hope, fell into hell. Those who lost everything with hatred in their hearts, like Perron, went to the border. What's left? He stared at the bright moon in the sky and muttered to himself, people like me, who can't even be ranked as a preparation for singing in my lifetime, an otaku like the old man who stays in the library all day, and a bystander like Tongi who has never belonged to the utopia, and a pitiful person like Yangzi who has nowhere to go. What are we? Look, Huaisher. He spread his arms and laughed self-deprecatingly. This is what we have to face now, an era that no longer exists, a celestial genealogy that has long been shattered. Huaisher was speechless. So, don't be disappointed. The ivory tower doesn't represent the utopia, and neither do I. Because this isn't all it is, and it's not where its value lies. Russell turned around and smiled at the students behind him. If I still have any achievements worth showing to them, treasures and chips worth bragging about, it's only the illusory future. He said solemnly, you and the future you represent. Being looked at like that, Huaisher couldn't help but sigh helplessly and raise his hands in surrender. All right, I admit defeat. He looked away. You old thing, you can really talk about anything. Can we not talk about this anymore? It's too awkward. Haha. This is the teacher's expectation for you. Huaisher. Work hard. Russell got up and patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry. At least I'm not lying to you. Also, he paused for a moment and said seriously, thank you for the wine. After saying that, he left the stunned Huaisher on the spot. He picked up his bath basket, hummed a vague tune, and turned to leave. After a long time, Huaisher finally reacted. Russell was really thanking him. Unbelievable. Then he noticed the exploded hot spring in front of him, the sirens in the distance, the hot spring attendant screaming in the corner, and the gun in his hand? No, let me explain. Huaisher was dumbfounded. He raised his hand and subconsciously wanted to look for Russell, only to find that the old bastard had already run away. He only felt his vision go dark. After 8 hours, on the other side of Yingzhou, Huaisher actually experienced the same sadness as old Lady Yangzi. People and people's hearts were connected. Thinking of this, Huaisher couldn't help but burst into tears. Russell, damn you. The next day, early morning, after a good sleep, Russell, with a radiant face, enjoyed the breakfast in the soup house and looked sympathetically at Huaisher across the table. You look so pale. Young people, pay attention to your body. Don't stay up late, because there are still many days to stay up late in the future. Who do you think did this to? Huaisher slammed the table in grief and indignation. I came back from the police station at 4 in the morning. Do you know how awkward it was when I explained to the people in Looming Hall that I was Huaisher? Dom was Huaisher. Don't worry, no one will laugh at you. No, it should be said that the people in Looming Hall might be very surprised. Russell calmly grabbed the bowl of rice and said casually, it's rare to see a law-abiding person like you, Huaisher. Most of the people in Ascension who do something, if they don't escape by jumping over the wall, they will violently resist the law. Those who have a little bit of status will act cool when they meet a thief. Occasionally, when they meet an honest and cooperative big shot like you, they can't wait to burn incense. Why would they use such a small thing to make things difficult for you? As he spoke, he raised his hand and ordered breakfast for Huaisher. Okay, after eating, get in the car and rest. I'll drive today. Russell said, if we take a shortcut, we should arrive at night. He put down his chopsticks and smiled. It'll be fast this time. Yingzhou? Huaisher asked. No. Russell shook his head. Outside Yingzhou. In only half an hour, Russell drove Huaisher to the seaside. In front of the private berth at the port, waiting for them was a huge and jaw-dropping yacht. The 3-story pure white yacht was printed with the logo of the ivory tower, and the 60-meter long hull was like a giant among the other yachts at the port. The deck was spacious enough to open a patty, and there was even a helicopter landing pad at the end. It's 62 meters long and has a draft of 7 meters. The internal facilities are all top-notch from Silver Monument. It's powered by both Origin substance and electricity, and the monster-level engine produced by the Cavendish Workshop can make it reach a speed of 90 knots. It's enough for you to leave anyone who wants to race with you in the dust. The order was placed 2 months ago, and it was just delivered the day before yesterday. I had someone drive it here. Russell walked in front and took the key from the person waiting on the shore. He played with it in his hand and turned to look at Huai Shi. How is it? How does it feel? Seeing his ugly face flaunting his wealth, Huai Shi couldn't help but roll his eyes. Why do you have to do this kind of thing when you have a bit of money? It's not me. Russell raised his hand and tossed the key to him. This belongs to you, Huai Shi. Chapter 9:27. Seeing the key being thrown at him, Huai Shi instinctively went to catch it. However, when he heard Russell's words, his hand trembled and he almost dropped the key. What is this? He suspected that there was something wrong with his ears. It's just a yacht, no big deal. Didn't you treat me to a drink? Just take it as a gift from me. Russell shrugged and did not say anything else. He walked towards the yacht. Only Huai Shi was still standing on the shore, holding the key in shock. He lifted it up and looked at it carefully. Huai Shi's first reaction was to quickly check the accounts to see if this was his money. After repeatedly confirming that he had paid in full, he felt like he was in a dream. Yacht? What did he want this for? If he sold this thing, would he be able to make a lot of money as a middleman? His face twitched. In the end, he sighed and kept the key. This was all his hard-earned money. Okay, I've been a tool for so long. It's not bad to get a yacht. Huai Shi, the country bumpkin, put his hands in his pockets and swaggered onto his own yacht. Then, he remembered he did not seem to know how to drive a yacht. 10 minutes later, Huai Shi started racing with the yacht next door. Of course, there were several hours of simulation training in the Book of Destiny. However, in reality, he was just holding the steering wheel on the yacht for show. What was really useful was the little white mouse, Fishball, who was dozing off on the steering seat while hugging a grain of rice. As the incarnation of Helios and the spirit of the sun chariot, it was just driving a yacht. It was as if Schumacher was riding a bicycle. It was too easy, especially when there was Osiris's main artificial intelligence, Beelzebub, in the form of a scarab. These two top drivers in the world took turns to drive a yacht. It was really lucky. After driving for a while, Huai Shi started to feel bored. After entering the coordinates, he turned around and returned to the cabin. He saw Russell, the polar bear, lying on the sofa and watching a comedy show on the satellite television. He looked extremely happy. As a bystander, Huai Shi couldn't help but shed tears of sympathy for the vice principal. Don't you need to work every day? Work? What's your job? Russell turned around blankly and stuffed 2 pieces of honey cake into his mouth. I'm Bear Bear. Bear Bear doesn't work. You're already so old, yet you're still trying to act cute. Huai Shi rolled his eyes in disgust. Then, without a guilty conscience, he collapsed on the sofa next to him and connected to the Wi-Fi to play games. Russell looked at him from the corner of his eyes. You're the chairman of a large corporation. Don't you need to work? Work? Huai Shi asked blankly. I'm just a passing calamity musician. I practice for 2 hours every day. I don't know what you're talking about. The master and disciple looked at each other and couldn't help but appreciate each other. They all had the same hateful face. Then, in the Pacific Ocean, the happy fishing time began. On the vast ocean, there were no restaurants to eat. Huai Shi ate lunch and dinner by himself with the ingredients in the fridge. Although there was a little too much seasoning in Russell's portion, he still ate happily. After throwing the plates into the dishwasher, Huai Shi looked out the window at the vast ocean in the night and still didn't quite understand. Where are we going? At the bottom of the sea? The secret base of the Utopia? Secret base? Russell looked at him from the corner of his eyes. When Utopia was still around, we always did things openly. There were a total of 16 offices in the Earth, the border, and hell. Every place was private territory. 50,000 meters above our heads, all the way to space, and 30,000 miles below our feet, all the way to the core of the Earth. It was all our land. Why would we need a secret base? These are all tricks that the Continuation Academy and the General Administration like to play. But there's nothing on the ocean at all. Fleischer looked at the coordinates on the map on his phone. It was completely empty. Otakus wouldn't put a welcome sign on their door. The guy can't wait for others to not come and disturb him. The so-called autistic child is referring to that kind of guy. Russell flicked the cigar ash in disdain, not caring that it affected the taste at all. Back then, that guy never dared to look people in the eyes when he talked. He was always talking to himself and couldn't communicate at all. He didn't want to talk to others either. These years, it's been as he wished. His territory isn't even on the General Administration's map. He occupies an island, and he has no idea how happy he is to play alone. There's such a person in the utopia. Fleischer was speechless. Once again, he felt that the world was full of wonders. Why were the surviving elders of the utopia all so strange? There was the old lady who was a drama queen, and now there was an autistic otaku. After looking around, he could only say that Russell was indeed the pillar of the utopia. He stood out among them. In comparison, he was simply the most reliable. If possible, I don't want to deal with that guy either. Russell sighed with a headache. It's still possible to communicate with people like Yangtze, but that guy is completely useless. He just ignores everything you say. No matter how many times you try to persuade him, he won't budge at all. Because of this, many people had a very tense relationship with him back then. Everyone was very unhappy at one point. In the end, he simply resigned and left. He was lucky enough to avoid a disaster. In the end, because of this, he became even more autistic. It's really a headache. He shook his head helplessly and thought for a long time before saying, "It's like those otakus who finally got out of the house to participate in work. You know, right? They don't get along well with their colleagues and make no progress in their work. In the end, after they resigned, their only friends died and they instantly became alone again. It would be great if Killian was still around, but that guy also died of serious injuries. The few people in the world who could talk to him are all gone." Fleischer was silent for a long time before sighing softly. "It sounds really lonely." "Lonely? Huh. That guy doesn't care. Give him a notebook and a pen, and he can play the prime number game for a whole year." Russell got up. "Get ready to be kicked out. Fleischer, our two bad guests are coming." At this moment, above the Pacific Ocean, in the vast sea, a thick fog suddenly rose. In the thick white fog, a distant outline slowly emerged. It was like an island, but it had an altitude and outline that an island couldn't compare to. It was like a ball. Fleischer looked up and was dumbfounded. A huge stone ball actually appeared out of thin air above this empty Pacific Ocean. It seemed to cover the entire island and the surrounding territory. It was tightly sealed, and not a single gap was allowed to leak out, allowing the sea to surge. It was physically isolated from the outside world. Fleischer couldn't help but feel ashamed to be able to stay at home to such an extent. Wasn't this too autistic? When the yacht approached, Fleischer felt the size of the stone ball more and more. It was like covering the sky and the sun. It was probably as big as an entire city. He reached out and knocked on the dark stone in front of him, only to find that these stones looked like natural obsidian. They were flawless, and there were many changes hidden inside that Fleischer couldn't understand. Don't use brute force, or you'll be paid back double. You still need to understand how autistic that guy is. Russell raised his head and looked at the dark stone in front of him. After all, he's the creator. In an instant, Fleischer went numb. He quietly put away the sword he took out and pretended that nothing had happened. He was extremely obedient. He completely extinguished the thought of trying it out. This was the creator, a big boss who had activated God mode in his own territory. If he tried it out, he might really die. "What's next?" Fleischer asked in a low voice. "We have to tell him that we're here, right?" He already knew, long before we entered this fog. Russell shrugged. "It's just that he pretends not to know. He can't be bothered with us, and he doesn't want us to appear in front of him. If we use force, he'll definitely find an opportunity to completely drive us away. That's how that guy is. He doesn't even take the initiative to drive people away. He didn't care that his words would be heard by the creator at all." Russell didn't hide his evaluation at all, but the stone ball still didn't respond. It was silent and turned a deaf ear to them. as if they didn't exist. It looked like it didn't care about them and didn't care about them. It was so cold that they didn't know where to start. What should we do? Huaisher was at a loss. Isn't that simple? Russell said matter-of-factly. When facing the ice in a partner's heart, naturally, we have to use warm friendship and love to melt it. Only then can we establish a bond and a connection. Huaisher, you have to read more shonen comics. You can learn a lot of useful things. Huaisher's eyes almost rolled back 360 degrees. I don't believe you. Why don't you try to reform one for me? Huaisher sneered. What's the hurry? Russell flicked the cigar ash and said calmly, why do you think I installed 16 extra speakers on your boat? As he said that, he took out a remote control from his pocket. He pressed it. In an instant, the deck flipped and 16 super large speakers appeared out of thin air. Huaisher subconsciously felt that something was wrong. Before mastery took effect, he raised his hand and covered his ears. Then, in the next second, a wave of air swept across. The entire sea area caused continuous turbulence and ripples before the terrifying noise of the speakers. At this moment, the entire yacht seemed to have turned into a huge speaker, facing the stone ball in front of it, and began to broadcast the campus in a passionate tone. Student Udanta Raman Sharma of Republic Phase 3, Group 6. Your good friend Russell has brought his student Huaisher to visit you. Open the door. Open the door. I know you're at home. Other than that, there was also the irregular sound of an electric drill, the brain-boiling sound of an air conditioner, and the rhythm of a square dance of a country ballad. It was like a terrorist attack that dropped a bomb of sound. In the end, it turned into Russell's karaoke singing and dancing, from ancient jazz to pop songs, rock, heavy metal, and even folk songs. The high-pitched sound echoed between the sea and the sky, and the crazy volume that was enough to shake the brains of ordinary people out reverberated and spread all the time, tormenting Huaisher's ears. However, the stone ball did not respond. Huaisher shouted at Russell with difficulty, but Russell calmly smoked his cigar, indicating for him to calm down. Then, Huaisher saw that this old bastard had even prepared earplugs in advance. In the end, he did not get one. He was so angry. Just like that, the noisy loudspeakers continued to call out to their cold, old friend with a deafening sound. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes passed. 5 hours passed, 10 hours passed. In the end, Huaisher felt that he had gone deaf. Just like that, 24 hours passed, a whole 24 hours. It was not until the stone ball shook crazily that a gap finally appeared. An angry voice roared, "Enough! Shut up!" However, on the deck, the deaf Huaisher could not hear anything at all. He was still playing cards with Russell, who was wearing earplugs. Then, in midair, a wisp of pure white water vapor condensed out of thin air. Like catkins, it drifted towards the vast ocean below. At that moment, Huaisher subconsciously raised his head. Staring at the almost invisible wisp of frost, he only felt a premonition of death burst forth. Chapter 928. It's the last day of double monthly votes. Please get monthly votes. A line of bleak white slowly slid down. Just like a beautiful line, slowly extending in the air, it fell to where they were like dancing steps. In that instant, the deafening noises and countless chaotic vibrations completely disappeared. It was as if the shield button had been pressed, and the world was silent. Huaisher was pressed to the deck by an invisible force, unable to move. He tried hard to lift his eyes, but could only see a dense white light. But Russell was oblivious. His head was still lowered, and he casually threw out the card in his hand. The card flew out from between his index and middle fingers, circling and flipping in the frozen air. It was as light as a bird, as if it had unfolded an invisible pair of wings, causing the world to turn upside down. Huaisher was suddenly in a trance, only feeling that the world was spinning. It was as if the card was still suspended in the air and had never moved at all. What was spinning and dancing was not this white paper printed with ink, but the whole world. The world was turned upside down, and the four directions were in chaos. It was not until the card fell silently into the pile of cards that the turbulent world returned to silence. King of Spades. Russell said, "I won. Why sure? Why are you still talking about this at a time like this?" Why sure found it hard to understand what this old guy was talking about. Moreover, he had seen clearly just now that Russell had thrown out a red ace. But now, after the dust had settled, the card in front of Huaisher had also changed. It was as if everything that had just happened was just an illusion. Russell smiled and spread out his hands. Just like a magician who had finished his performance, he showed off his deception. Then, Huaisher saw that the line of frost falling from the sky had finally arrived. It fell from the sky, like a phantom, penetrating their bodies and the deck under their feet, and was still going straight down. It was not until the moment it touched the sea that an ear-piercing roar burst out of thin air. Then, the terrifying white waves swept and spread in all directions. The cold wind howled and shrouded everything within, and the resounding sound of the iceberg growing could be heard incessantly. The turbulent sea surface froze in an instant, and the low temperature continued to spread downward, all the way to the bottom of the sea. At the same time, it spread upward, freezing the moisture in the air, forming a deadly white mist tornado. A few seconds ago, a creator had planted a frozen seed here, and a few seconds later, a towering tree had risen from the ground, turning into a pale pillar that was half gaseous and half solid, separated by the sea surface. All of this really happened, but at the same time, it also seemed like it didn't happen, because the two realities overlapped at the same time. It was as if the transparency of two images had been lowered and superimposed together, presenting a strange picture that was completely opposite yet integrated into one. Huaisher fell into confusion. It was incomprehensible. This was his first time witnessing Russell in action, but he had no idea what was going on. Was it the cards or the world that was spinning? Where was the boundary between reality and illusion? Was it them or that wisp of white mist that was illusory? Was that card the King of Spades or the Ace of Hearts? The magic time is over, Huaisher. Russell slowly raised his hand, flipped the card that had fallen to the ground, and covered it back on the pile of cards, hiding the truth in the darkness. He smiled meaningfully. It's enough to be a qualified spectator. There's no need to delve into the principles, right? Thus, all the illusions quickly blurred, the frozen world disappeared, and the sound of the tide rang out. Everything was calm. Nothing happened, but the door finally opened. Russell stood up from the deck and patted the dust off his body. He stretched his stiff body and cheerfully raised his head to ask, "What's the matter?" He raised his head and asked, "Long time no see, Sharma. How have you been?" No one responded, but Russell was not anxious. He just waited quietly. It was as if he had enough patience to wait until the end of time. After a long silence, a muffled voice came from the stone ball. An annoying old ghost came to my door without an appointment and made 24 hours of noise, disturbing my research, exhausting my patience, and squandering the last bit of goodwill I had for him. And now, he actually has the cheek to ask if I'm doing well? How strange, Russell. How can it be such a shameless bastard in this world? Have you really cared about whether others are doing well or not? If there's really nothing wrong with your brain, then let me tell you, I'm not doing well. Sharma asked coldly, "Can you get lost now?" "I'm doing well." Russell spread his arms comfortably. "If I remember correctly, after so many years, including before you left the Republic, this is the longest sentence you've said to me." He took a deep breath and exclaimed, "You're really flattering me." Huaisher, who was beside him, moved away a little in disdain. Does this guy really have no self-awareness of how annoying he is? Then Russell really did not treat him as an outsider at all. Like an annoying relative who refreshed outside the house during the holidays, he showed a warm smile. "Since you're already here, why don't you have a meal before you leave?" Sharma did not say anything. He was angry, miserable. Huaisher could not help but cover his face. It was as if he saw an autistic otaku's face gradually turn red under the glib tongue of a salesperson. "Bro, don't you even know how to curse? Big brother, say something. As long as you say something, I can scold them for you. Starting from, there must be a wise discussion between two armies. I can scold them all the way until you give me a 5-star rating. I won't even take a breather. Don't worry, it'll only be a while. Russell sincerely promised, I'll leave after eating. I won't disturb you. How about that? I swear. Just like every dogman who sent a girl to her house with bad intentions, Russell's expression was extremely sacred and solemn, without any trace of weirdness or indecency. Only Huaisher rolled his eyes up to the stratosphere. Like hell, I believe you. Then he realized Sharma seemed to really believe him. Looking at the crack in the stone ball, Huaisher's jaw dropped to the ground, as if he had seen a ghost. Bro, don't listen to this old thing's nonsense. Nothing good will come out of him entering your house. Why? Why did you let a wolf into your house? With sympathy and regret, Huaisher could not help but punch his fist and shake his head vigorously behind him. He followed. After passing through a long corridor and a series of thick doors, Russell actually managed to enter the interior of the stone orb as he wished after going through several erasure attempts and scanning for unknown purposes. Huaisher was hanging behind him. The moment he entered, he discovered that the huge stone ball was actually transparent from the inside. The pitch-black membrane had disappeared without a trace. Everything in front of him was no different from an ordinary island. It was the same yellow sand, seawater, reefs, and even a dense forest. The only difference was that the color of the forest was a little strange. It was no different from other places. Then he felt breathless, as if he had jumped into a closed box. There was a trace of rancid smell in the air with little oxygen. It was similar to a refrigerator that had been left unattended for half a month after the power was cut off. He subconsciously raised his head, but before he could sneeze, he felt a layer of plastic, membrane-like things sealing in front of his mouth and nose. Be careful, Sharma warned indifferently. Don't touch everywhere, and don't leave any bacteria that don't belong to the local area. It's best not to touch anything, especially not to leave any excrement. Huaisher was dumbfounded. His face twitched for a while. Speak more if you can. How did a sneeze turn into someone defecating on the ground? However, he was living under someone else's roof. He was the creator. Wasn't it normal for him to have a strange temper? He shook his head and took out a gas mask from his saddlebag. He put on his face and did not dare to say anything. He could only secretly count the favorability points. 1. You're still doing that research? How many years has it been? Russell looked around. You can really keep your composure. Sharma did not answer. A small path appeared under their feet, leading them across the seawater and into the deepest part of the island through the air. There was a layer of transparent membrane around the path. It was like a sealed corridor, as if it was afraid that they would take something back. Just as they were silently moving forward, Huaisher heard a vague cry. A black shadow suddenly flew over their heads. When Huaisher raised his head, he saw the silhouette in the distance. What is that? Huaisher frowned. Why does it look like pterodactyl, right? Russell walked in front and did not stop. He just pointed below, indicating for him to observe carefully. Then, Huaisher saw countless swaying shadows in the lush forest. Those silhouettes that could only be seen in archaeological documentaries. Strange birds rising and falling, and even trilobites crawling on the beach from the seawater. A velociraptor suddenly rushed out from the dense thorns and bit off the saber-toothed tiger's neck. It dragged the corpse and disappeared into the darkness. And in the strange seawater, the silhouette of a colossal creature slowly rose. This colossal creature from ancient times swayed its body and gracefully swept across the surface of the sea. Huaisher could not help but stop in her tracks and watch attentively. Jurassic Park, Huaisher exclaimed. It can actually be realized. Heh, if that's the case, why would it be worth the creator's time? Russell looked back and reminded softly, this place is completely isolated from the outside world. Huaisher, haven't you realized it yet? Huaisher only felt a buzz in his head. When he looked around the world in the stone sphere again, he finally discovered the essence hidden under the exaggerated appearance. The entire interior of the stone sphere, the entire area in front of him, was a giant ecological bottle, an independent, isolated world that was completely different from the outside world. It was almost no different from a different world. It was like sealing moss and water in a flask to test the limit of the life inside. Since the birth of ecological science, countless scholars had failed repeatedly, trying to create a complete ecological circle from nothing with their own strength. They did not hesitate to spend countless funds, efforts, and time to try to challenge the authority of the Creator. However, without exception, they all met with tragic failure. But now, an independent world that was infinitely close to completion had appeared in front of Huaishur. What was this? Should he admire this magnificent power that belonged to the Creator, or should he be in awe of the degree of autistic otaku? Ordinary otaku shut themselves in at home. At most, they would make figurines, put together models, or make fish tanks or hamster huts. In the end, someone was able to create a closed world, and on the basis of ensuring a closed cycle, it made the life inside transform and reverse, returning to the primitive era known as the Jurassic period in the life theory. Was this the ultimate form of otaku? The ultimate power of autistic isolation? How many years has it been going on? Russell asked curiously. This progress is already much better than the last time, right? 51 years. Sharma said coldly. Thanks to your visit, 0.00024% of the gaseous matter has been lost in this area. The loss caused by this will become an irreversible consequence after 4,600 years. It has successfully shortened the theoretical lifespan of my closed-loop area by 90 years and 4 months. Why don't you go back and fiddle with it again? Russell casually took out a strange fruit from an unknown forest and ate it. Crunching sounds could be heard as he ate it. After eating it, he spat out the peels everywhere, especially when he said those words that made one's blood pressure rise to the max. Just do it casually, just brush it and dong it. I don't understand it anyway, but isn't it quite simple? You can definitely do it. Huaishur began to retreat, taking the initiative to distance himself from Russell, fearing that a lightning strike from the sky would affect him. This guy is not human at all. Is there no heavenly punishment? Chapter 9:29. In the end, Sharma actually endured it and ignored him. When they reached the top of the mountain, a reception area like an isolation room had already been set up on a bare flat ground, with an invisible wall sealing the inside and outside. The BSL 6-level biological protection was enough to block any level of chemical pollution. It was just short of 2 showers to welcome guests like Russell to take a bath. In front of them, the table was already piled with delicacies. Here, it specifically referred to unlimited instant noodles, cola, self-heating meals from the Astronomical Society, and compressed biscuits. Fat otaku buffet. Eat as much as you want, don't worry. Eat your fill. Huaishur looked at the table full of food, speechless. You're only giving instant noodles. Why don't you give us some water? Otherwise, are you going to let people crush it and eat it dry? Moreover, Sharma had no intention of showing up at all. He didn't intend to show his true face. There was only a stone sculpture covered in moss behind the table, motionless, resting his chin on his hand, looking like a statue of a contemplator. The indifferent middle-aged man's face was full of exotic charm. He had curly hair and a high-nose bridge. He wore a petrified headscarf with an unusually elegant texture. It was decorated with layers of gold ornaments and an egg-sized ruby. Even the stone sculpture's eyes were lowered, looking at the table, not intending to look at the visitors at all. You can start eating. The stone sculpture's lips didn't move, but a cold voice was heard. 1/2 an hour. Finish eating and leave. Why so long? 15 minutes will be enough. Russell didn't care at all. He sat down happily and patted Huaishur on the shoulder. Hurry up and eat. Huaishur, why aren't you eating? It's rare for a senior to treat you. As he spoke, he divided half of the food on the table. The corners of Huaishur's eyes twitched, and he had no appetite. What a joke. He was no longer the boy who could be satisfied with boiled noodles. No matter what, he was still a cooking demon from hell. Wouldn't it be delicious to roast anything he caught outside? But he didn't dare. After all, he couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't be the one on the grill. He could only endure. I'll eat later when I get out. Russell, on the other hand, had already rolled up his sleeves and opened a pack of self-heating dry food from the Astronomy Society. He began to chew on the slices of vegetables inside before the flatbread and stew heated up. Crunching sounds could be heard, and it seemed to whet one's appetite. Moreover, he even took out his phone, intending to watch a video to eat. "Hey, what's the Wi-Fi? Why can't I find it? I don't have that kind of thing here." Sharma coldly refused. "I'm not interested in what's happening outside." Hiss. Huaisher sucked in several breaths of cold air and couldn't stop at all. He fell into a state of shock. He was even more scared than when he first learned about the ecological bottle. This was the first time he had seen an otaku who was so autistic that he didn't even use the internet. "Brother, are you all right? Should I get a psychiatrist to take a look?" At the side, after Russell put down his phone, he seriously suggested, "Shalma, I plan to rebuild the heavenly state genealogy. Do you wanna?" "Not interested." Before Russell could finish, Sharma interrupted him. Russell, on the other hand, was very calm. It was as if he didn't have time to play games with his friends. He nodded casually and said, "Okay, then forget it. Let's talk about it next time when we're free." He wasn't persistent. In fact, he didn't even try to persuade him anymore. Instead, he picked up the spoon and ate the stew in the self-heating bag. Even his stuff called hot wax and olive oil could be eaten with relish. From time to time, he would casually chat about his daily life, as if he was really here to visit. "Speaking of which, you should have entered the Utopia earlier than me, right?" Russell asked. "If I remember correctly, you should be in the second phase?" "The first phase," Sharma answered coldly, his voice flat. "Yes, that's right. You left when I graduated from the fourth batch. I should actually call you a senior. You should also have feelings for Utopia, right?" Russell said, "Is it convenient for you to tell me why you're not interested?" "It's not convenient." Sharma's answer was as concise as ever. He was strong. So be it. A cool breeze brushed past the hills. Even if he let Russell come to him, he still had no intention of communicating with him. No, even if he let him in, he would at most choose the best solution after weighing the pros and cons, right? From the beginning to the end, Sharma's attitude had never wavered. He would not change because of Russell's provocation or words, nor did he intend to record anything Russell said in his schedule. If you want to say something, say it. Leave after saying it, and don't come back. Huaisher suddenly realized that perhaps this extremely autistic strategy might be a little fatal for Russell. No matter how crafty and glib a magician was, he would be at his wit's end when faced with an audience who had their heads lowered and played with their phones. When the other party didn't care about the outcome of the magic trick, the dazzling process became no longer important. However, Russell didn't seem to care at all. It was as if he had come here just to eat and to kill time. He had randomly chosen a topic. But is this really a good idea? Russell held his spoon and asked in confusion. If we just leave it be, Utopia might never reappear. Sharma's stone statue had no expression and would never make any expression. He just replied coldly, "It has nothing to do with me. After so many years, do you hate Utopia?" Russell asked. "I think it should be a good place. You should like it." Sharma said, "It has nothing to do with you." Russell raised his eyebrows slightly, seemingly helpless. "Do you hate me that much?" "No," Sharma said. "I hate you more than that." "What?" Russell spread his hands blankly. "When you two quarreled, I spoke up for you. When you were beaten up, I was the one who sent you to the infirmary. I even sent you there several times. Did I beg you?" Sharma said, "Maybe you should find someone else." "All right, I admit that at that time, I was gloating over your misfortune and wanted to show my kindness and integrity. But you didn't lose out, right?" Russell asked. "Isn't it very pleasant for everyone to take what they need?" "Not all," Sharma reminded him. "You still have 5 minutes. Then I'll have to hurry." Russell was stunned and immediately became anxious. Then he buried his head and began to eat in big mouthfuls, as if it would be a pity not to finish the food in front of him. He took a bite of the scone, a bite of the stew, and 2 sips of the instant drink. In between, he didn't forget to say vaguely, "Since you're not interested, I don't want to be too long-winded. However, I think Utopia is a good place. Everyone can find fun and do something there. You should be the same. Sharma, you should really think about it. Anyway, you'll have nothing to do. It's better than being locked in a bottle, right? No need. Sharma replied without hesitation. I'm fine by myself. I know it was very unpleasant back then. I can understand that you don't want to get involved in this. Russell finished the last bite, took out a handkerchief, wiped the corner of his mouth gently, and got up to say goodbye. However, before I leave, there's one more thing I should tell you. You should listen carefully, Sharma. This is the only thing that has nothing to do with my purpose for coming here. He said, Ing Fong Zhou is dead. In the brief silence, Huaishir seemed to see the silent stone statue's gaze move slightly, but in the shadows, he couldn't see anything clearly. So, didn't he die a long time ago? Sharma said coldly. That guy was so troublesome, and not everyone liked him. He liked to play the hero so much, so it's not surprising that he died. That's true. You seem to have a bad relationship back then. Russell seemed to have just remembered this matter. He patted his head and sighed. If you have a blacklist, he should be at the top. You should be the kind of person who hates cooperating with others the most, right? Especially such a rigid guy. Every time you quarreled, you would be pressed to the ground and beaten, but you couldn't beat him. There's no point in bringing up the past. Sharma didn't intend to participate in this topic. I know, but I think you should understand. Russell said. He came back to life again a few days ago. What do you mean? It's not appropriate to call it resurrection. It should be called reappearance, right? Although it was only for a short time. Russell thought for a while and sighed from the bottom of his heart. My students witnessed the whole process with their own eyes. That guy's fighting posture was really impassioned, not inferior to back then at all. Even if it was just listening to someone else's retelling, it made my old bones boil with blood. Unfortunately, that guy didn't learn to accept other people's opinions in the end. He wasn't willing to be a little tactful, but he didn't take a step back either. He was still rigid. I really don't know whether to admire or feel helpless. The stone statue was unmoved. It didn't even want to listen anymore. What does this have to do with me? I just want to hear your opinion. Russell shrugged. After all, you're the one who knows him the best among all of us. I don't have any opinion for you. Sharma said, You should go, Russell. Keep your promise and never come back. Okay, then goodbye. Russell waved his hand coolly and took a step back, but left a piece of paper on the table. There's still a long time. If you change your mind, feel free to contact me. Sharma didn't say anything else. The stone statue returned to silence. When Huaishir followed Russell out of the stone sphere and the gap of the door closed behind them, he finally couldn't hold back his doubts. You're leaving just like that? He asked. What else? Russell asked back. That's an invincible creator in his own domain. If I can't persuade him, I can't beat him and bring him back, right? Moreover, a long-term cooperative relationship is like a relationship. What's important is that both parties are willing. Pestering won't end well. Huaishir only wanted to laugh coldly when he heard this. After being tricked so many times, there must be something wrong with his brain to believe a single word from him. He said decisively, You must have done something. Chapter 9:30. Cause trouble? Don't talk nonsense. I'm just reminiscing about the past with an old friend who's been living alone for a long time. Russell tilted his head and lit a cigar. He suddenly asked, Huaishir, when was your happiest time in the past? Huaishir answered without hesitation, When it's time to make money. Huh, you're really straightforward. Russell was amused. Other than that, it's not this kind of temporary peace that lets the panic temporarily leave, but the time when you're sentimental from the bottom of your heart and can't bear to let it go. When was it? Huaishir thought for a moment, lowered his head, and looked at the instrument that was frozen in amber on his wrist. It's probably when I was playing the cello. He sighed softly. When I first learned to play the cello, I didn't know anything, but I instinctively liked it. In the sound of the cello, all listeners can be very satisfied and feel happy. I didn't lose anything. Even after becoming an ascended one and being able to enjoy unscrupulously, nothing can compare to this feeling. But you didn't have a good life in the past. That's right. Huaishir nodded. No matter how difficult a life is, there will always be light, right? Russell smiled and stared at the gradually setting sun in the distance. Everyone has it, and Sharma is the same. Huaisher glanced at him from the corner of his eyes and looked at his happy smile as if he was looking at the beautiful past. He only felt that this old man was really sick. You were clearly thinking of ways to make things difficult for him just now. Okay? Before you left, you even used your old enemy, Ying Fang Zhou, to embarrass him. No matter how you look at it, it's revenge. This isn't contradictory, Huaisher. Russell turned back with a happy expression. It should be said that this is the most amazing part. The happiest time in Sharma's life was spent with the person he hated the most. What? Huaisher was dumbfounded. If there's anyone in this world who can truly understand Ying Fang Zhou, it should be him, right? Russell turned around and stared at the stone ball that was gradually disappearing into the distance. He muttered softly, after all, other than Ying Fang Zhou, no one else can drag him out of his shell. In short, they were mortal enemies, right? Scholars who closed themselves off to the point of not listening to any persuasion, and ascendants who were too proud and rigid to listen to any suggestions. Sharma, a scholar from India, and Ying Fang Zhou, an ascender from Xia, had completely different strengths and weaknesses. They had never been teammates on the same channel. As early as the first moment they met, they had already determined that the other party was a person who would never get along with them. Whether it was rationality or instinct, they all coincidentally blacklisted the other party. If possible, he didn't want to stay in the same room with her for even a second. In truth, both sides had never concealed their dislike and disgust for each other, but that did not stop them from cooperating closely without any gaps during their exploration of the abyss. Above personal likes and dislikes were missions and work, and hidden under the dispute was the recognition that even they themselves would not admit. If they wanted to realize their own value, if they wanted to fulfill their own ideals, then they had to rely on the other party's existence. No one else could achieve the results that the other party could bring. It was not an exaggeration to say that such an efficient and awkward combination was using each other. They were not sworn brothers, but partners who tried their best to endure and restrain each other. But other than that, there must be something else. If the other party was no longer around, he would definitely be lonely. When Russell left and returned to the silent stone ball, all the isolation measures prepared for outsiders disappeared. But the stone statue remained in the same place, silent, until a phantom that did not belong here appeared. He sighed helplessly. Looks like it's not the right time to visit. Even at this time, I collided with that bastard Russell. Woodman from Golden Dawn shook his head and seemed to pity him. Even now, you still haven't given up on your dream of rebuilding heaven. As expected of you, Russell, as he spoke, he turned around and asked, since you rejected him, what do you think about our proposal? I won't even consider it. The stone statue remained motionless. I said, I'm not interested. You should go. Then, sorry for disturbing you this time. Woodman responded with a smile and did not pester him. He just lifted the brim of his hat and politely said goodbye. But before he left, his footsteps paused. He sighed silently. Sharma, I know how much you hate the outside world and how much you hate those who keep disappointing you. But no matter how prosperous and lasting the world inside is, it doesn't have any value or meaning. You should make a choice, he said, not between the remnants of the Republic and the rebels of Golden Dawn, but between the inside and the outside, between the puppets who will never let you down and the others who will hurt you. Woodman, I've already made a choice. The creator in the ecological bottle opened the door to leave and told him bluntly, the world inside is very good. Please don't disturb me anymore. If that's the case, why do you still want to see Russell and me? Woodman turned around, took one last look at him, and asked softly, will there really be no regrets in the world inside? The stone statue did not answer. Woodman's phantom had silently dissipated, like a ghost evaporating under the sun, disappearing without a trace. In a long silence, the huge ecological bottle closed again. Everything returned to order. Countless laws operated in accordance with the will of the Creator, slowly making up for the damage and hidden dangers caused by the outsiders, readjusting the operation of the wind, rain, and tides, and revising the established history of the future. In this way, the yearning extended from the present until it was ensured that thousands of years later, tens of thousands of years later, it would endlessly move closer to the non-existent eternity. There would be no accidents, and there would be no unreasonable abnormalities. It was perfect and harmonious. From a beginning to the end, Sharma did not make any other movements. A breeze blew from afar, rolling up the business card left by Russell on the table and landing in front of him, along with the invitation of Golden Dawn. There was no need for any movement. With just a thought from Sharma, the two pieces of paper without any strange properties would begin to decompose from matter, from pulp to elements and dust, and then disappear without a trace. But for a long time, the two pieces of paper did not change at all. Will there be any regrets in the world inside, Sharma? I don't know, Sharma replied softly. But he died so contentedly that it makes me sad. The disgusting face appeared in front of him, with a fearless smile that was no different from the past, and the Creator closed his eyes sadly. Because I have nothing to gain. The next day, after a night of sailing, Huaishur and the others had already landed and arrived at the Hawaiian Islands, a colony of Rome in the vast Pacific Ocean. The largest children's paradise in the Pacific Ocean. In the past, due to the political competition and power seesaw between Rome and the Americas, Hawaii had become a rather peculiar place. Due to its loose legal system, it had become the world's largest offshore company registration place, and the tax system was even more relaxed to attract more funds. At the same time, while vigorously developing tourism, the education industry was also quite prosperous. The Ivy League had set up all kinds of training facilities here and used this place as a training pilot for their ascendants. With the selling point of gifted children's education and relying on the local legal conditions, they had set up mathematics, physics, and logic classes that did not have age restrictions to search for talented new blood. There were even driving and shooting courses for ordinary people in cars, speedboats, and helicopters, as well as extreme sports courses such as parachuting, skiing, wingsuit flying, and so on. There were no age restrictions and no restrictions on the subjects. You could pay on the same day, start learning on the same day, and graduate in 10 days at the earliest. As long as there was money, even an 8-year-old child could come here and learn amazing skills after a few months of training. Unfortunately, Huaishur and the others did not come here to inspect their peers. After renting a car with their license, they slowly went to Honolulu. On the way, Russell kept turning his phone in his hand, as if waiting for a call. Huaishur looked at the side and shook his head. He hasn't contacted you yet. Looks like he really doesn't want to talk to you. Yeah, it's really sad to part with an old friend. Russell sighed and sadly stared out the window, lonely as snow. Hee hee. Huaishur sneered and stepped on the accelerator, too lazy to talk to him. The address Russell gave was in the suburbs of Honolulu, in front of an ordinary house in a residential area. Under the afternoon sun, one could see behind the fence a dog lazily lying in the shadow under the eaves, using its rice bowl as a pillow and sticking its tongue out. What is this place? Huaishur looked carefully for a long time and couldn't see anything strange. He only felt that it was worthy of being called a senior master, hiding in the city and not showing any abnormalities at all. It's just an ordinary house. Don't think too much. Russell seemed to know what he was thinking and looked at him with a strange expression. Who are you looking for this time? Huaishur asked. After so many years, I'm afraid we can't find anyone. We're just doing our best. Russell raised his hand and pressed the doorbell. For a long time, no one in the house responded. It seems that there's no one, Huaishur. Russell sighed. Let's go. But in a car slowly stopped not far from the side of the road. Behind the rolled-down window, a middle-aged man with whiskers poked his head out and looked at them curiously, carefully distinguishing the appearance of the two. Excuse me, are you Mr. Russell? The owner of the house got out of the car and asked with some uncertainty. Russell was startled when he heard that. He and Huaishur looked at each other. In the present realm, thanks to the sophisticated and careful cognitive operations of the Astronomy Society, The membrane between common sense and non-common sense was very stable. In order to protect the stability and social order to the greatest extent, the Astronomy Society interfered with the Silver Ocean and formed a complicated mechanism. All knowledge and phenomena related to the ascended and outside of the present realm were blocked by cognition. Unless there was someone like the ascended, alchemist, or related work, even if they occasionally saw some strange things, it would be treated as something normal and thrown to the back of their mind. Even if he was famous in the borderlands, for a normal person, Russell was probably just the president of an unpopular university. He was not worth their attention. As for Huaishur, who was he? The runner-up of the 9th Muse Cup in Xian High City? At this time, on this island in the Pacific Ocean, it was strange for a normal person to be able to recognize Russell's name. Russell studied him for a moment. After confirming that he had never seen him before, he asked in confusion, "You know me?" Chapter 9:31. It's really you. I thought I got the wrong person. The middle-aged man couldn't help but smile in surprise. He was stunned for a long time, and then he let out a long breath, as if relieved of a heavy burden. "Hello, Owen Carter. Just call me Owen." He introduced himself excitedly, picked up the big bag he bought from the supermarket, and opened the door. "Please come in. The house is a little messy. Please don't mind it." 10 minutes later, Huaishur and Russell were sitting in the slightly messy but warmly decorated living room. Faint steam rose from the teacup in their hands. There was also a dog running around in the living room. In the end, it snuggled into Huaishur's arms and asked for a pet. Huaishur hugged it and rubbed the dog's head. They looked around. There were bookshelves everywhere, filled with all kinds of information. There was also a huge table full of drawings. There were all kinds of strange creatures and buildings drawn on them, as well as some young and cute children. There were also all kinds of picture books and fairy tales in the display cabinet. It looked like a painter's studio. And in the utility room, there was the sound of rummaging. After a long time, Owen wiped the sweat on his forehead. His face and arms were covered with dust. He came back with a huge box with some difficulty. He placed it in front of them. "I finally found it." He breathed a sigh of relief and sat down. "My father left a will before he died. He said that one day, if Mr. Russell in the photo came to visit, I should give this to him." He took out an old photo frame and compared it with Russell in front of him. He sighed. "I didn't expect that after so many years, you really haven't changed at all. It's not surprising that people will stagnate and change when they get old." Russell slowly put down the teacup and looked at the iron box in front of him. "That guy is really whimsical as always. But didn't you suspect such a ridiculous will?" Owen shook his head. "Most of my father's arrangements have his reasons. Besides, since it's a will, as a son, I have nothing to say." Next to him, Huaishur was holding the dog and looking curiously at the furnishings in the living room. He observed the exquisite fairy tale picture books. "Did you draw all these?" "Yes." Owen nodded, a little embarrassed. "I'm now an illustrator who contributes to magazines and advertisements. Occasionally, I'll produce some picture books to make a living. If you like them, I'll give you 2 later." "That's great." Huaishur nodded. "I happen to be worried about what gift to bring for my students. Can I trouble you to sign a few more books?" "Of course, that's not a problem. However, students?" Owen was puzzled. "We work in an educational institution. Mr. Huaishur has recently become my assistant," Russell explained calmly. "He, your father, didn't tell you about this?" Owen shook his head. His father seemed to have never told his child about the world of the Ascended. Under Russell's probing, he quickly discovered that his father knew nothing about it. Perhaps this was the protection that the father had left behind for his child. To ordinary people, the world of Ascenders was not necessarily beautiful. "He actually didn't tell you about his previous job?" Russell said, "Mr. Carter used to be our best white dove. Well, you can think of him as a member of the Research Institute. Before he retired, he once went deep into the wilderness alone for us and collected many precious samples and data. He made outstanding contributions." "Oh, like an explorer?" Owen's eyes lit up. "He never told me about this. When I was young, I used to fantasize that he was an assassin who hid his identity or a ruthless character in some dark organization. Now that I think about it, it doesn't match my father. He had his difficulties. Russell said, "It's not good to tell a child about the hard life of living in the open. Besides, he sacrificed a lot for this." I can more or less guess. Owen nodded and sighed. Someone like him who is too serious about himself would definitely not let his life be empty. As for why he didn't tell us, he must have his reasons. However, he was very satisfied when he died. That lack of regret made me envious. So, I think he must have done a very valuable job, right? For example, saving the world or something. After saying that, Owen was amused by his ridiculous imagination. He shook his head and did not say anything else. He only pushed the dusty box over. "No matter what, I believe that my father has completed his mission. Thank you for coming and allowing me to see his value once again," he said solemnly to the guest in front of him. "Now, I'll give you his last legacy, Mr. Russell. I only hope that my father's legacy can be of some help to you." Russell lowered his head and stared at the dusty box and the password lock that had never been touched. "Aren't you curious about what's inside?" he suddenly asked. "You've never opened it?" Owen was stunned. He fell silent. He seemed to be struggling between curiosity and some kind of persistence. After a long time, he shook his head. "Before my father left, he told me that if I wanted to abandon my current life one day, I could open it. But I think my current life is good, and there's no need to change anything, so forget it." He took a deep look at the iron box that had accompanied him for many years and looked away without any pity. "Anyway, it's not mine anymore. Let me maintain a mysterious fantasy." Luo Su nodded and didn't say anything else. Before leaving, he begged the two to sit down and drew 2 sketches for himself. In the sketches, Russell was a dignified and cold old man, holding a scepter in his hand and looking awe-inspiring. Huaishir, on the other hand, was a travel-worn wanderer, but she had a smug smile on her face as if she owned the entire world. Was it his imagination and processing as a painter, or had he accurately grasped something with his intuition? It was really hard to understand. After finishing the sketches, Owen was also shocked by his results. He asked excitedly, "If possible, can I use them in the picture book? This is your work." "Of course, it's as you wish." Russell carried the box and finally said, "If you need any help, please call this number at any time. I owe you and your father a big favor." He handed over a business card. "Trust me, I could do most of the things you need." "I will." Owen took the business card seriously and put it in his pocket. He didn't doubt Russell's promise, but he didn't seem to care about the promise that was worth a lot. "Just in time. It's time for me to pick up my daughter from school." He picked up the car key, full of expectation and joy. "Thank you for your visit today. It seems that I have a new bedtime story to tell her tonight. Grandpa's legendary story. She'll listen to it." Russell was stunned for a moment and sighed helplessly. "I really hope that I can have a positive role in it. It would be better if I could live to the end of the story. I'll try my best to arrange it," Owen promised with a smile. Just like that, after saying goodbye to the two of them, he drove away. After a long time, Huaishir looked away. "You're envious, aren't you?" Russell sighed. "There's nothing better than having a descendant who's willing to live a normal life. Watching him get married and have a family and finally die with no regrets. I'm afraid people like us will never have such a wonderful life. Isn't it good now?" Huaishir shrugged. "Although that kind of life is enviable, I don't think there's anything bad about my life." "That's right. Other than not being able to have a stable relationship, there's nothing bad about it." Russell looked deeply at Huaishir, hinting at something. Huaishir suddenly choked and was speechless. After returning to the car, he looked at the heavy box in Russell's hand and asked curiously, "Can you tell me what's inside? What's there to hide?" Russell slowly fiddled with the combination lock and asked, "Do you remember what White Dove does?" I remember Raymond told me that they're all elite researchers of the Ivory Tower." Huaishir was a little uncertain. "More or less. They're all explorers of the original kingdom of heaven." Russell sighed. "White Dove, Red Deer, Gray Stork, and Black Whale are all honorific titles for outstanding explorers. Only researchers who have made great contributions to their own fields can get such titles. Red deer is a wandering merchant who patrols hell. Gray stork is a lurker who goes deep into hell. And black whale can only be obtained by a group leader in hell. As for white dove, they're the most elite explorers of hell. They're the researchers and combat units who fight on the front line. They're responsible for the rescue excavation of hell's relics and important discoveries. As plunderers who are granted a privateering license and are allowed to use all kinds of force, when necessary, they can exterminate anyone from the body to the soul. White Dove was the symbol of the Republic's ruthlessness in the abyss. For lone explorers like them, it was not an exaggeration to say that they were an army by themselves. In the past, Huaishur needed a secret ritual to recruit a large group of people in the Village of Dusk, but every White Dove had at least 10 army contracts and more than 1,000 hell creatures serving them. It was because of their existence that the Republic of Heaven could control the network of hell, and the research of the Ivory Tower could complete continuous breakthroughs. And this is the legacy left behind by the most outstanding White Dove. Russell slowly opened the iron box and stared at the ancient scrolls that were almost overflowing. Every one of them was filled with the words of hell and stamped with seals and origin substance. There were 6 thick notes that recorded all the exploration experiences of hell, more than 400 army contracts, hundreds of tokens from hell, 3 anonymous accounts from the demonic gold bank, and 2 deep safe keys. The terrifying reserves that were enough to start a full-scale war between hell were now stored in this small iron box. After a long period of silence and waiting, it followed the will of its owner and came to Russell's hands. "Welcome back, my friend." Russell pulled out a short sword from the top of the chest. The radiant blade forged from cursed iron shone in his eyes, and countless illusions from the past appeared in his eyes. "Let us rebuild everything once again," he murmured softly as he sheathed the sword, carefully keeping it in his bosom. Everything returned to silence. "Let's go, Huaishur." He closed the box and stared at the dusk outside the window. "It's time for us to go." Huaishur nodded, turned the key, and started the car. He turned around and asked, "Where are we going next?" "Let me think." Russell pondered for a moment and suddenly asked, "Do you like to drink?" "I'm all right. Occasionally, I'll drink a few glasses, but I don't care if it's good or bad." "What about gambling?" "Although it's very exciting, I still don't want to touch it at all." "Then, what about beautiful women?" Russell suggested. "Forget it." Huaishur sneered and asked, "No matter how beautiful they are, can they be as good-looking as me?" "If you always argue like this, you won't find any fun, Huaishur." Russell shook his head and sighed regretfully. He felt sorry for his student's poor performance. Next stop, America. It was as if he saw the neon lights of luxury. His words became mocking and hoarse. Las Vegas. Thought you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.